Boys, gals, and non-binary pals. Today, obviously, I have a returning guest, Scum Mage Infa. Say hello, Scum.
Hello, hello.
Today, we are going to be watching Scum's latest release, along with Scum, and kind of having discussions about everything we're looking at in the video. I'm going to have some questions. If there's questions in the audience, you guys are welcome to ask questions as well. And we'll do some pausing and discussing and stuff like that. But um, but anyway, good morning everyone, and good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Um, and yeah, hi. So let's get into it. Let me pull up your video.
Buckle up.
Yeah, yeah, everybody buckle up. Okay, YouTube. So how long were you working on this video?
Getting 8
About
ads every 20 minutes
probably
is
just over a month in total.
Oh my god.
Maybe
Over
a
a
bit
month.
longer, like unknowingly, but
I
yeah, it snowballed horribly.
can't imagine working on a video for that long. I can't imagine working on any kind of project like that for that long.
It was dreadful.
I know that you
It
contacted
was,
me multiple times to tell me about like well, you didn't even have to tell me. I could hear it, but how much you had
despair.
been talking and the absolute
Oh,
weatherment that was visited upon your voice, your
it
lovely
has been
voice.
wretched. Absolutely wretched. Ruined it. Sounded like a raspy chain smoker.
Well, I know you'll be happy to learn. Hi, Blackman, and hi, Spud. I know that
Hello.
you'll be happy to learn that actually in the video, you sound quite even keel through the whole thing. Your voice sounds good through the whole thing, from my perspective. And I listened to it
Oh.
twice, and then I listened to it again, falling asleep last night. So
No, you know what I know. I was like, you know what I thought? I was like, God, I really love the sleepers. They're the best. They're the best audience members, and I'll tell you why. Because they just sleep through ads. They just let them roll. Absolute champions.
and so, do you get more pay when someone watches an entire ad?
I don't know, to be honest. I probably should know that, but I have no
Yeah,
idea.
that's
I imagine you
interesting.
probably would. It'd make sense
Because I'll
if
be
someone
honest
doesn't
with you,
skip it.
for some people, if I knew that me just watching an ad would make them more money, I would literally, I would, uh, I would watch ads
You'd
for
grit it.
them. Yeah.
I don't know. It's not YouTube's like basically not giving you a choice these days. It's like here's like a minute long ad. Enjoy that. I get them frequently.
All right,
Oh,
guys.
the
So
infinity.
let's get started with the video. Let me quickly set up my side chat so I can read what chat is saying.
Here we go again.
Is it a misery looking back on this monolith?
This is the first time that I've watched it again since I've like hosted it. So I was in like a fever dream state by that stage. So this will be this will be enlightening. I hope
Okay.
I don't realize I missed anything. I'll be really upset.
Well, hey, that's why you can always take it down and re-upload it. No, just kidding.
Absolutely not.
It
I
would be
literally already
so
did that
funny.
because I spelt fucking Kitetail's name wrong. Tails. I was like, oh my god, I'm so tired. Just stop the upload. Oh god.
Hi, Celebrate. Welcome,
Devastating.
welcome.
Welcome, Solibray.
All right, let's get started. I'm gonna press play, and at first we'll start off just watching the video, and we'll pause every here and there. Just if you have something to say, you can let me know to pause, and obviously,
I'll be
and
watching the chat.
yeah, and I'll be watching the chat as well, and stopping when I have a question or a comment. So here we go, guys.
What on earth this giant tree stump was? What did it really look like outside of the dark, deep root depths? Was it the base of the Erd tree? Did it extend all the way up? If it was, why did it not shine with radiance like the Erd tree itself? What about the tree Godwin was imbued in? Was that the Erd tree? Or perhaps this giant seemingly severed stump on the world map represented something else entirely. Perhaps this reference to a great tree on several items offered a hint. Now, after years of wondering, I have the means to check. Rising above, we see a flurry of roots and what appear to be straight, solid tree stumps. While all of them are in their own right huge, as I fly backward, the full scope of this immense, imposing figure really starts to take shape. But it isn't until we break through the crust of the underground that we see it in all of its colossal glory. Towering above everything else, unmatched in its girth and stature, this titan, wrapped by intertwining vines seemingly keeping it stable, stands peerless. This is what I believe to be one of the two great trees, and a part of what is referred to as the One Great.
So here's where my first question comes in. First of all, epic music. You um overlaid the perfect soundtrack for this scene. It's fucking intense. Um, but my first question is: do you see the art design for these particular? Um, I don't know the way it cuts off. It's a tree stump basically
Yeah.
underground. Do you
Yeah.
think that that's an intentional choice, or they knew we wouldn't ever see it and just were putting it in there?
It's really hard to say because on one hand they know that people are going to free cam obviously through the game, but whether or not they're going to whether or not they're going to actually make that like a lore relevant thing that I don't know how like meta they get with that, and it's like just how mentally sort of like mentally ill and how
Mm-hmm.
spirally it's going to get, you know what I mean? Like where do you stop? Is it like actual archaeology and you have to use different tools to get to different layers of something to understand it on a different level, or is it just are you meant to like I've been told by some people they just take it at what you can see with the telescope and by walking around, and that is about where they'll stop with it. Anything that you can't see and you need a free cam to see, they sort of just discount, which I can understand both perspectives.
I can understand both perspectives as well, but a little bit of extra that I want to add into the conversation in
Hmm.
regards to people who look at things the way that you do. Um, I know that
I think that too, Celebrate.
Miyazaki changes things
Hmm.
in the last like the last iteration of the game, like what we end up playing, is often very different from like just months before that. Like for example, with the Saint Trina stuff, and all of those items and everything, those are locked away in the files. It seems to be as though they will never be used, and there's a tremendous amount of content there. And I think the same can be said for areas that we can't currently access, like maybe once upon a time or in some kind of, you know, scenario when they were first making all these models and the skins for them, they were under the impression that we would be able to see these things. So there's always that as
Well,
well.
well, I mean, there's 3 points on that. I've pretty much forgotten the third already, but the first is that it depends on whether or not. Well, no, sorry. The first one is a lot of the things that were quote unquote cut or unused material actually did resurface in the DLC, just with different names. Really, at the end of the day, is the only major difference between a lot of them. But then the other thing is, I wonder how many of those quote unquote cut items are actually just items used by other NPCs that we can't obtain. I have a couple of examples, but like they're going to be things in my next video, so I won't dive too much into them. But there's like, I mean, for example, this one's not going to be in the next video, but Fear's panties. Um, you know that's an item that she has, and that you used to be able to get into the game that they locked only to her now. So it's still something that's in the game, but it's something an NPC is only using. It's not lore relevant, so I figured I'd bring it up. That's the only reason that I brought it up.
Okay. So like all of St. Trina's like little globe
The orb.
and the yeah
The orb,
and
yeah.
the drinks that you're supposed to be crafting with it, the
I
elixirs or
think that
whatever.
one of them was the concoction that Tolier has, isn't it? Tolier has. One of them was used as that,
I don't
but there's a
think
couple that.
I mean it could be. I could be misremembering, but I if I remember correctly the icons that they crafted for it were these like glass, like there were chalices and then there was like a glass receptacle with a glass lid, and you could see the fluid inside of it, and it was like the dream source or whatever.
The dream source.
I
Here's a
don't
good
know what to
one.
call it.
The Lord of Blood's exaltation, you know Moog?
Uh-huh.
How there's that little icon of him in the Lord of Blood's exaltation, and it has an effect where it makes you sort of go red when its effect is happening.
Uh-huh.
There's pretty strong evidence to suggest that he's actually got that equipped.
Oh.
He has the same effect that has on he has the same effect appear on him during the fight, which has, by the looks of it, the same sort of effect.
That's
Um,
fascinating. I've noticed that the Clean Rot Knights also have the Clean Rot w- successive attacks, you know,
oh,
increase
do they? Yeah,
damage.
there you
Yeah,
go. See, it's just
yeah.
another example of it. Like, I really do think that I think that a lot of these things that we can't get are just things that other NPCs have that we just can't get.
Spuddifer,
Some,
there was, and actually Scum Mage Infa, of all people, interestingly enough, pointed it out, but I believe it was in his video previous to this one. But yes,
I'll check that. What did Sputter say?
he's asking if there was evidence in in the base game of Mikola and Radon, and I was
Why is my chat updating? That's so annoying. I'll have to go check that on the actual on the desktop. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I reckon there was a couple of things. Someone else pointed something else out to me that was like a big wow moment for me, but I've forgotten, which is pathetic. Oh, I've got it somewhere buried. I always screenshot something if I think that it's a big wow moment, and just so I can remember who to credit for it.
that's a
Because
really good idea.
I hate not being able to find the original post. I feel so dirty. I can't bring myself to mention it.
Yeah, I would feel that way too, especially if I was
Yeah,
making content like this, Scum. My goodness. All right,
job
let's let's resume the video.
that.
The community is absolutely rife with
Look,
debate
it's
about the
me.
existence of what is referred to as the Great Tree,
I'm
with the
looking at you.
naysayers suggesting it is a translation issue, as Erd Tree and Great Tree share the same Japanese kanji, while those in favour of its existence more often than not point to the root resin item description, which specifically and distinctly references the Great Tree, among several other items. I, however, am entirely convinced of the existence of the Great Tree, predecessor to the Erd Tree, and I believe I have ample evidence. But this goes far beyond the stump I just showed you. There is so much more to it, and the implications are vast. I spent the last month examining tree iconography throughout the game, discovering depictions of great trees that existed before the time of the Erd Tree. I've gone to every castle, notable building, and every fort, as well as examined statues, weaponry, and armor, to look for the tree symbolism used and compare them. This was a side quest on my information gathering for my next video on the grandmother, but the things I found regarding trees warranted a video of its own, and like always, this little Alice found herself free-falling down a rabbit hole, and we will get into the many things I have discovered. However, quickly before I even move into the nuance of these depictions of trees and the many mysteries that they hold, I want to quickly address the translation issue with a question. If all of the references to a great tree are simply referencing the Erd tree based on the Japanese kanji, then why in all of the patches Elden Ring has undergone have critical pieces of information about arguably the most important icon in the game, the ever-present Erd tree, in foundational contexts and on important...
Did you ask me? Did you ask me to pause?
No, just saying hi.
Oh. Yeah, hi Jesse, sorry. Okay, continuing on.
items, nonetheless, be left untouched. There is not a single instance of any item or anything referred to as the Great Tree ever being patched to Erd Tree. On the contrary, there have been several additions specifically of the word Great Tree into
Maybe
items.
you might want to share your screen in Discord with me so I can see where you're up to, because there's a bit of a delay with the stream.
Oh, there is, isn't there? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. I will do it.
Thank you.
Subsequent patches, such as the root resin, which reads, resin secreted from the roots of the Great Tree, can also be found near trees on the surface. The roots of the Great Tree were once linked to those of the Erd Tree, or so they say, and it is for this reason catacombs are built around Great Tree roots. This is doubling down on what is an already pretty compelling description in favour of the Great Tree's existence. Just like the description of Deathroot, which had no reference to the word Great Tree and had it specifically added, not Erd Tree. Or as my friend Garrulus pointed out to me, the map of the Deeproot Depths, which also had the word Great Tree added to its description later on. These examples aside, I honestly don't think either perspectives are technically wrong. The Great Tree is a separate thing, or was, and the Erd Tree is of the Great Tree, or rather, part of it, akin to the way a graft is a part of what it is grafted to. If you have someone else's arm attached to you, or an organ after a transplant, it is then your arm. No? I will of course be expanding upon this. With that said, if the Erd Tree was the first, then what are these depictions of a great tree on the obelisks in Shiofra River, or in the Mogwin Dynasty Mausoleum, hidden behind this mysterious structure, or on the tablet of this figure, or these tall straight trees and these small bending ones, or this depiction of a tree with life bursting forth in Farum Azula, or between these two beasts, or this one on the graves of the beastmen, all predating the time of the Erd Tree.
I should probably pay for premium.
Depictions of great trees tell a story. They are vital elements of the timeline of Elden Ring and the lands between, and today we're going to explore them all, and possibly expose the identity of the fell god and nature of the original sin along the way. We have many depictions of great trees throughout the game before the time of the Erd Tree. Beyond that, we even have physical great trees separate to the Erd Tree, so the concept of a great tree equal to or rivaling that which we know as the Erd Tree is hardly a foreign one. But which one was first? Which is the original tree? What was there before the one tree to rule them all? Throughout the lands between, we see an abundance of tree iconography and symbolism, and we even find some in the Lands of Shadow. Some of these icons are clearly the same depictions or very similar, with small changes detailing the passage of time, while others are entirely different. They are also, of course, seldom in isolation to other symbols and patterns, which all help us to narrow down the timeline or associations. Once you finally figure out which ones were there first, and which ones were put over them, and why. These icons tell us a very important story and reveal the timeline. A timeline of the one great, which was operated by two great trees.
Sorry, on the, I didn't mention it in the video, but on the doors of the catacombs, you can notice, I think you can notice, if you go back to the doors on the catacomb, you can see there's like, at the top
in the Lands of Shadow,
branches, it sort of also looks like fruit amongst the people.
Yeah, it does. And then at the bottom, you can see
gold.
like it's after this, right?
Soul juice, I think so. Yeah, it's just after this.
Yeah, there. There's
Yeah,
also
I've watched
these
enough to know that.
little.
Yeah. It's like
That's
when you go in
really
the
good.
catacombs and look at the bodies, they look very similar to those clustered sort of
They do.
solid looking. You'll also notice those ladies down the bottom left and right are the
Mhm.
same ladies from those depictions above all of the they're actually in a lot of places. Not only are they in the Eternal Cities on the chests, but they're
Oh, is that the
also,
libation ladies?
yeah, they're the ones with the jugs on the round table hold, and
Mm.
you can find them at Stormvale, a number of places. But yeah, they're all over the place.
Fascinating. This actually did bring me to a question, but I'm holding off because I want
Yeah, that's fine.
to let like your video get to a certain point. But I have such a burning question. But anyway,
Write it down, love.
okay.
And
Oh, I won't
why.
forget.
These icons tell us a very important story and reveal the timeline. A timeline of the One Great, which was operated by two great trees. A lot of research went into this. Naturally, there'll be quite a bit of information, so bear with me and buckle up. This is one hell of a tumble, Alice, and we are most certainly not in Kansas anymore. Before I jump into the thick of the tale between two trees before the Erd Tree, it's only right that I explore the Erd Tree itself first. If we follow what I have referred to as the stump, or perhaps carcass of the great tree from the deep root depths nestled close by the nameless eternal city, we notice 6 intertwining vines or roots wrapped around it. Though only 5 are visible at its apex, if we go inside of the stump, we can clearly see the 6 accompanying roots or vines. Remember this imagery for a little later. The colour is consistently dark brown, and if we move closer, we can see the many hues that comprise it. But as we reach the top, just as the map seems to insinuate, what we see here is a stump, while there is no shining Erd tree present, or even a hint of gold coming from this tree. It is very possible, and I would argue even likely, that this is meant to continue and be what we see above ground as the Erd tree. But there's more to it than that. As we follow the Erd tree to its apex, we notice some pretty strange things along the way. First, at the crevice into its hollow interiors, we notice what almost appears to be an inner crust of not glowing gold tree, but something more akin to the stump or carcass of the deep root depths. This demonstrates a distinct difference in color, texture, and position, which heavily insinuates, in my opinion, 2 separate entities. This separate brown section dons a carving on it, which I will note on eventually. And as we continue upward, the outer crust of gold gives way again, a seemingly patchwork of gold plating engulfing the great tree. Suddenly, we are again greeted with the similar brown of the deep root depths, and the branches seemingly so very akin to the vines crawling up the great tree, splayed, with gorgeous white elvenesque vine patterns all over them. I believe this is the carcass of one of the 2 great trees, the continuation of what we saw in the deep root depths. And what we see engulfing it and growing from within it, springing from within its hollow boughs and brilliant brown branches glowing a sickly radiant gold, is the Erd tree. I believe its existence as something separate to this carcass of the great tree is reinforced again by the fact that the glowing branches of the Erd tree disappear when you light the tree on fire, whereas the carcass of the great tree it grew from within remains. Almost as though the golden branches sprouting from the carcass are in fact illusory, as described by its very seeds. The gold seeds found by these golden homages to the Erd tree. A golden seed, found at the base of an illusory tree. When the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erd tree, scattering across the various lands, as if life itself knew that its end had come. So how did this happen? What transitioned this great tree to the Erd tree that we know today? Hell, what even is the Erd tree? Well, to quickly revise the concept, as I have explored it many times in previous videos, from the many descriptions and depictions of the Erd tree, we can get a good idea of what it is and how it functions. It is known that souls are reintroduced to the Erd tree via the Great Tree Network, and are seemingly redistributed via the Great Tree or Erd Tree as well. The Elden Beast, which is the Elden Ring, is housed within the Erd Tree. The souls that are processed through the Erd Tree likely either give it power or imbued with its, the Greater Will's, will, and redistributed through the lands between so as to spread the influence of the Greater Will, imbuing life with grace. But how did we get to this perfected monolithic powerhouse? What was there beforehand? And why did it change? There is another theory I am half and half about regarding the state of the Great Tree. It doesn't change the end result, but it is a relevant detail nonetheless, and does have implications which I will revisit later on. And that is, instead of the Erd Tree growing from within the carcass of the Great Tree, it was in fact felled. And what we see in Deeproot Depths is a stump. Perhaps what we see growing from within the Great Tree is in fact growing with the Great Tree, therefore displaying aspects of the predecessor. The Elden Beast, the physical incarnation of order, nestled in this felled tree stump, growing with it and providing its structure and designed or ordered growth, very akin to this tree, which is an artificial method of coppicing, which is, in essence, a tree regrowing from a stump, in this case, using its root system. And this imagery is hardly isolated. We see examples of what appear to be an important priest in the middle of a tree stump with new offshoots growing from the stump, himself nestling the favoured one. To reinforce this further, not only does Marika's cape look like a tree stump she is rising from, like the tree from the stump or carcass of the Great Tree, but Radagon is undeniably standing upon and seemingly growing from a tree stump, with very familiar vines wrapping around it. His hair also is becoming part of the backdrop lattice, representing order. If that is the case, and the tree was felled to make way for its regrowth, including the influence of the Elden Beast, then I feel like all the components for this age, the Age of the Crucible, are summarized quite neatly in the armor of the Orders of the Crucible Knights themselves. We have Ordovus and the axe, also the symbol of Godfrey, the Elden Lord of this age, symbolizing the felling of the Great Tree. We have Siluria and her weapon, which is based on the crucible of the Erd Tree, so the precursor to the Erd Tree, and the matter that comprised it, which was a stump, which housed the Elden Beast and was fed innumerable souls over the period of the crucible, and Devonia, with the hammer, to rebuild, to reforge a new age. The symbolism doesn't end there either, as I believe this is meant to be a bird's eye view of a stump, with roots spreading outward. I believe, over this period, the era of the Crucible, an immense number of souls were sacrificed.
Did you say something?
Yeah, I just neglected to mention that if it was like meant to be a tree stump with roots going out, then the fact that the roots are going down like that does remind me of the Farum Azula rune.
The Farum Azula rune. Oh, the like
The one
Elden
with the
Ring
roots
rune?
going down. Yeah, that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. And so
Yeah.
does this image. It's right in front of us, just like
Mm.
inverted or whatever.
I did kind of realize as well that a crucible seems to sort of be the opposite of what an Erd Tree is. One's sort of ascending and one's a
Yeah.
receiving situation, which is fun. I guess, well, one's a precursor to the other, but just their functionality, I guess.
I think it's
What
I
it is
think
in
it's
the
interesting that the crucible seems to be where all carnal life was like melded together, and then it starts differentiating in the carnal, but the runes themselves can be extracted by the tree, and then it doesn't really matter what the carnal representation of life was, because the runes can be in any life form, can't they?
When you think about it, I mean, the one greater, like the greater will, rather, since it, I mean, Ymir says that we all come from the greater will, not the one great. Yeah, I mean, technically that would be a crucible, since it's a melding pot of everything, if everything came from it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like, crucibles seem to invoke divinity wherever they sort of appear and happen, so
Yeah,
it's
and
just an attempt at godhood, really, isn't it? Every single time to pierce the veil.
and it's fascinating because I think somewhere in the game there's a tree called the Crucible Tree, isn't there?
Is there?
I'll have to find it, but I remember there being.
Because it makes sense if people are like hanging themselves from those trees, you know what I mean?
In
Like,
fact, I kind of want to Google it and see what we come up with.
in fact, I'm googling it now.
Yes, right now in front of everyone. Elden Ring
Check.
Crucible Tree. Crucible Tree set. Okay, so there's that. Is there anything else? about a crucible tree. Maybe not. Maybe it's just the crucible tree armor.
Well, I mean, the precursor to the Erd tree is a crucible, and Siluria's tree might be what you're thinking about, because it's based off of its crucible. So that'd probably be it. It'd be Siluria's tree, the weapon.
And that's interesting. Did you know that
Siluria? I think I'm saying that right.
did you know that, like, if you look here, all of the knights, all of their names are right here. Devonian, Silurian, Ordovician, and these are all periods of time in the past when life was just beginning. Oh, look, Blackman is actually saying the same thing that I am. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the first things I noticed about the Crucible Knights as a paleontology nerd. Um, and I remember there was somebody way back who kept saying it over and over, and I was like, "Listen, lady, hold on, I haven't got there yet." And I would have to like tell her to be quiet. But it's funny because she's right, and that was something I would always been trying to talk about, because my approach to finding out lore in this game is very geological and like biology based. So I just found it fascinating that not only is there something called the Crucible Tree armor set, um, and you're just talking about, the Crucible Knight armor has like a tree stump. Maybe that was the Crucible Tree. Maybe the Crucible Tree is the Great Tree, or maybe it's a tree that came before the Great
That's
Tree.
definitely what it is. That's what it is. That's literally what that is. It says it in Siluria's tree that it's based on the crucible of the Erd tree and it's shaped as a tree stump. That's what I find it interesting that says, by the way, era, and it's all of those periods are under the same era, which is basically what those sets
Paleozoic.
for the Crucible Knights are. It's the era of the Crucible, and those would have been different periods or events within that era. So that's super interesting. Where the hell did you find that?
Where did I
That's
find
fun.
this?
Yeah, I love that.
This
That's
is
great.
this is just periods of Earth's history. This is just
Nerd.
yes, yes, I am a paleontology nerd, and this is where paleontology begins, where life began in the Cambrian period, where complex life first
That's really
arose.
cool.
So the earliest life were like single cell organisms, which came from these eras, but complex life came from the Cambrian, and they call it the Cambrian explosion. And from there, all kinds of more complex life came, and then there were multiple giant extinctions that gave way to niches to being filled by further evolved creatures, and that's how we came up with fishes that walked on land. Insects were there first. La 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 la. It keeps going on and on and on. But the notable part of the Crucible Knights being called Devonian, Silurian, and Ordovician is that in paleontology, if we visit those periods, the Devonian period, you'll see like the kind of animals that were popping up were most life was in the sea, and the life that started going on land was very amphibious. Well, what could we call the ocean? It would be the crucible, where all life was melded together, where all life comes from. And then if you go to like the Ordovician period,
That'd make the seashell iconography make a lot more sense,
yes,
really,
because
wouldn't it?
literally look at these.
And the mermaid iconography.
Mhm. Because life comes from the sea. At least in our world, it does. Um,
It's such a pity they didn't do more with the ocean. I really did expect like a big Hydra sort of situation, like the Dark Souls. Is it a Hydra? I forget what it was. It was a big sea creature, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that would have been fascinating. There was a giant Japanese humanoid that is like just a shadow that was supposed to be in the oceans, and look what it is, hallucinogenia, which is why I think, and which is Elden Beast mixed with the Laniakea supercluster, and you know what the Laniakea supercluster is, don't you? We're going
That's sorry, yeah,
way
the
off.
star cluster. Yeah.
But yeah, this is and this star cluster is on a really big gravitational anomaly called the what we call it in real life is the Great Attractor. But I've always said what they call it in Elden Ring is the primordial. What do they call it? The primeval current. And if you look here, this one, the Laniakea supercluster, wherein our galaxy
It's got
lies.
like the nervous system, and then like the Elden Beast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And then over here, the back of the chairs in the Nox Eternal Cities, it's silver, and it looks just like that. It also looks like a centipede, and it is an opposing star cluster on the same gravitational anomalous wave, but attached to it kind of adversarially. So almost like the Elden Beast versus that thing,
Death and life.
and that's called the Perseus Pisces supercluster. And so I was like, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if like here's a good example of the way they look. So the Great Attractor would be the wave that's connecting
You
these
live
two.
inside of this.
Yes,
The
we live
lands
inside the
between.
pink one, and then the Perseus
Mm.
Pisces supercluster is this one over here, and
Looks
just
cold.
awesome. But anyway, that's
Yes.
why all of these things are connected. And when I look at Elden Ring, these are the things that I see, and I'm like, holy shit. And
I wish the Ordova sun was more fish coated. That would be lovely.
well, the Silurian period is, I think, the Silurian and the
No, doesn't it say Ordovician period?
yeah, the
just there?
Ordovician.
The
But
sea.
this is very like as you can see here, these are like
Then
mollusks.
again, I shouldn't say that. There's
and
plenty of water coating stuff.
arthropods. Yeah, this is a fish here. The
They've got
fish.
scallop.
Yeah.
They've got scallop shells everywhere, like Langdell, Elphael, Farum Azula actually as well. All have scallops, which is the thing that you see at Aphrodite's feet. Which I mean, to stretch that a bit further, is pretty much even to the point of the kink in her knee. The same depiction as the Glomide Queen on the Godskin peeler.
Yeah, there you go.
So
And the Silurian period
fish.
has a lot of scorpions. This is where scorpions were literally like the apex predators of both the sea and land. Like, so all of this stuff is relevant and really, really cool.
Make a video. I want to see it. Hurry up.
No, let's go back to yours. Oops.
I mentioned you making me like, anyway,
Back
moving
to
on.
you.
Christ in order to power the primordial crucible, comprising the matter referred to as the precursor of what we know today as the Erd Tree. This would mark the age of the crucible, of Godfrey and his crucible knights, the Erd Tree burials which don very telling doors, showing the process I mentioned
Same
earlier,
gold, these
though
same
as a
doors.
footnote, I am not entirely sure if this is the Erd Tree, and the Colosseums, where warriors and criminals would fight and die in ritual combat, their souls returning to and nurturing the Great Tree roots. We know the catacombs featuring Erd Tree burials are connected to the roots of the Great Tree, or Great Tree Roots, as per the root resin item description, and they are absolutely everywhere in the lands between. Likewise, we know the minor Erd Trees, or perhaps minor Great Trees, are also connected to these roots, as they are always found nestled close by to these catacombs almost every time, if not with jars surrounding them, to feed them and the root system, and therefore the Erd Tree. During the age of Godfrey and his Crucible Knights, the Erd Tree grew from the remains, be it stump or otherwise, of the Great Tree, sustained and fueled by the souls of those from the Erd Tree burials, Colosseum fights, and Great Jar sacrifices, funneled to it through the network of Great Tree roots. You can think of the Erd Tree and the two main trees before it as the largest trees of a quaking aspen, the Tree of Heroes, whose crowns of trembling leaves gave them the power not only to visit the underworld but also to return safely, like Pando, or the Great Swamp Tree in Avatar, both which cover an immense expanse and consist of multiple trees of varying sizes. Perhaps this, on an even grander scale, is being hinted at by the description of the knot resin and tree resin, the resin loci likely being corpse wax, hinting at the fact that perhaps all trees share the same roots. That is how vast the Great Tree Network is. The One Great. I think this is reinforced further by Godwin and his death root, the fact that he is described as being connected to the roots of the Erd Tree and yet is seemingly imbued into a minor Erd Tree. Not only is this tree dead, given his position and the position of the tree, plus the presence of a cracked tear regarding the soul and body, the very nature of his affliction and tie to Rani. And if that wasn't enough for you, a contingent of unique priests and omen, both of which use death magic and are totally not a death cult, guard this tree and chalice in place of the usual guardian. The nature and spread of this death root is, in my opinion, further to the root and tree resin's combination, clear evidence of the interconnectedness of all trees. As while he is imbued into a minor Erd Tree, this has impacted the entire Great Tree Network, and we see death roots appear in many Erd Tree burial catacombs, which we know is connected to the Great Tree roots. However, we also see death root appear in random villages, and even in the snow, really demonstrating the reach of this network throughout the lands between. All of this in the effort to corrode the Erd Tree's roots and stop the ability of souls to return to it, ending its age of plenty.
Your father knows about saving money.
I'm so sorry, guys. I'm gonna take care of this.
Special room in a building in Lane Dell that I think brilliantly sums up the transition from the age of the Crucible to the age of the Erd Tree, with reliefs looking newer and shinier than all others in a unique Crucible orange gold. And when it's exposed to light is a yellow gold. This icon is very akin to the stump icon with shoots growing up from it, or the promising shoots from the birth of the Erd Tree. We see these shoots next to the depiction of the Erd Tree over and over again, and in the center of the room is a giant, uniquely large, red-gold, crucible-colored depiction of the Erd Tree in its infancy. But it doesn't quite look right. Like it's been added later on, almost as if to represent the changing of an epoch. And if we look behind it, we see a singularly unique, large, red-gold, crucible-colored depiction of the shoots, replaced and covered by the new iconography and order. If that wasn't enough for you, a Crucible Knight donning the armor of Siluria specifically, whose weapon reads Siluria's Tree, weapon of one of the two honored as foremost among the Crucible Knights. The primordial form of the Erd Tree is close in nature to life itself, and this spear, modelled on its crucible, is imbued with ancient holy essence, the primordial state of the Erd Tree being its crucible, being the remains of the Great Tree, and the souls funneled to it, giving rise to the Erd Tree, exactly as her weapon and armour depict, akin to the shoot depictions surrounding her, which would grow to be the Erd Tree she is facing. Side note, does his cranium look like roots or brain matter? Eerie.
Definitely
But why would they
brain.
fell this Great Tree just to regrow it? What's the point? Why couldn't the Elden Beast simply nestle atop this Great Tree and control the flow of souls some other way? Well, I believe the reason lies in the original sin, and to fix the Greater Will's mistake, that being the fault in the design of the One Great, the mistake that led to fractures, and the removal of souls from the Great Tree Network, something that was borrowed, and so, what was borrowed must be returned.
So this is what you believe is the Crucible Tree, this one?
No. I'd say it's that big stump.
The big stump, okay. And the big
Yep.
stump is both the Crucible Tree and the Great Tree? They're the same thing?
Yes.
Okay. Alright. So what I wanted to ask you is, because we're still talking about the tree, but I think it's going to shift to something else in a moment. No, we're still talking about the tree. Okay. Oh. Okay. We'll be talking about the tree for like an hour.
I was about to say, the counting the trees. We ain't quite done.
So, I just want to add this in there then. Have you, two things. The first one, have you thought about, okay, so when we go to the Land of Shadow, and we see that giant tree there, and it looks like, that tree failed for one reason or another. Kitetail says that she thinks that, like, all of the fragments and everything, it looks like the tree has been burned. And she's right, like, it does kind of look that way. If you look at, like, the burned bit, there's another tree, like, wrapping around it, and as you follow it up higher, it looks less like a natural tree and more like a storm, like a still of, like, a tornado that's, like, cycloning around the the tree. So clearly some kind of event happened, but my question is, do you think that that tree in the Shadowland and the tree are two different trees, or do you think they're really meant to be the same one, but one is dressed up all pretty and the other one is like the actual tree?
Yeah, I had Jack and I had a pretty big discussion about that quote unquote event, but we all have our different ideas for it, but it's a pretty big theme in the next video, so I won't go there. But as for the state of the Skardu tree, the Shardu tree, the Skabadabadudu tree, it is potentially three things. But one of them that appealed to me was if there were two trees, and those two trees have both been destroyed, essentially, and replaced, in essence, with the Elden Beast, which has nurtured this chosen stump into the monolithic powerhouse of ordered soul processing that the Erd tree is, then those two trees, which were living organisms, I'd imagine, which carry and processed souls, would have souls themselves, so I'd imagine if they were something like Telperion and Laurelin from Lord of the Rings, that if they were married, then the fact that they're in the spirit realm, like, to me would be, it's like they are the one great together, so the fact that they're entwined would make sense to me. The fact that they are broken would make sense to me, and then also that would also make the description of the, I forget what it's called, the giant flower weapon that you get, the sunflower weapon. How it describes a second shoot lovingly embracing the other. So, I mean, that relationship to me is very reminiscent of Telperion and Laurelin from Lord of the Rings, at least.
So then you don't think that they are the same tree?
There are two other options, but I can't talk about them because they're in the next video.
Okay. All right, and then
I feel like I'm gonna have to do that quite. I'm so sorry, but I'm probably gonna have to do that.
That's good. This gives us all incentive to tune in for the next video, which is exactly why we're doing this.
See you in a month.
Yeah, see you in a month, mates. But yeah, no, I'm glad this. That's the other thing, is me doing this, asking questions, also gives you material that, like, Kate wants this shit answered, so you put it in your next fucking video. But
have you considered this? I expect to see an answer in your next video.
Like, here you go, bitch.
Powerful.
Due by Tuesday.
She's planting seeds. Feel free in the comments to plant seeds if you want something answered. I'll do my best.
Yes. And the other thing that I'm really curious about in regards to the Erd tree and everything. So you were talking about the two great trees from the Lord of the Rings. And how one is lovingly embracing the other, and we know that, like, the shaman are tree people. Do you think there's a possibility that Marika and Radigan, those people, maybe the people that are under the blanket wrapped around with a horn in Enir Elim, do you think maybe they are trees, and they are those trees embracing each other? And La 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 la. Is that a thing? Maybe, possibly.
If Marika's a shaman and shaman are tree people and Radagon's Marika, then that's obviously a huge possibility, considering they're both tree
Obvious.
people, definitionally.
And they
But
are the
like,
same person
else,
but different people, just like a tree grafting into another tree.
well, I'll just say it's very
Grow the
interesting
same
that
stuff.
their skin appears to be stone at the
Mm.
end. I've always found that very interesting.
Me too.
Clay, even.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely, to me, that seemed like evidence that they were like dragon people, because dragons have like stone skin, and they're the only other thing I can think of that has stone skin. However, now I'm starting to think that the only reason why dragons have stone skin is because they were petrified by an eclipse. But anyway, we'll get into all that later. The other question that I have is, have you taken a close look at the shield that the tree knights carry? What are they called? Tree sentinels? Tree sentinels?
I
Um,
sure have.
and that ritual that it looks like is occurring. There's a
Mm.
man like gracing or bestowing or something, some
He's
kind
got a
of
sword
ritual.
and an arm
Yeah,
outreached
and
towards the tree.
a staff in the other
Yeah.
hand, a sword in one hand, and
And
then a woman.
there's a
It
very
looks like.
interesting pattern on the back as well.
Yes. Are you going
Very
to talk
interesting
about that in
pattern
your
on the
next
back.
video?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
It is my belief, after my long time researching, that the great tree that was felled to make way for the Erd tree was one of 2 original trees of the Great Tree Network. I believe this network was operated by the functioning of 2 trees, the Erd tree as we know it simply being the chosen candidate to be supercharged with sacrifices.
Oh, one more thing I just realized.
Mm.
Gleaning from what you just said, so you believe the shadow realm is the spirit world?
I don't know if it always was, but I feel like it is now.
Because
And
that's where
given what I'm
death wishes
finding
are.
out, well, yeah, and given the placement of the divine towers and when they were likely made and their relation to the suppressing pillar and the suppressing pillar's relation to all ruins and their relation to the old death rituals, and the fact that you can kind of you can kind of place the creation of all of those things around the same time period because of the relation of the iconography between them. Like I didn't get into it in this video, but between the forges and the divine towers is actually a lot of shared iconography as well, and a lot that you wouldn't expect. They make it pretty difficult to actually see it, because I don't know if it's intentional or not. It might be, but unless you rip the texture, it's very hard to see what what it actually is. But when you know what it is, then I mean it's clear as day that it's related to the divine towers.
Yeah. Wow, okay. All right. Just curious because I used to think that that was the case, and then when I played through the DLC, I didn't think it was the case anymore, and now
Mm.
I'm just fucking confused. So I just wanted to see what your perspective was.
Oh,
But
there's some very confusing stuff. Like
it's
I
very
was looking around the
confusing.
Church of Bud, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
I noticed on the ground the tablets that are all around there with the flowers on the top of them. They're the exact same ones that you find.
In Oak's Palace.
We, they're the exact same ones that you find in the mountaintops of the giants, scattered
Oh,
everywhere. So that was a bit of a spin. And then
wow.
also the Church of Bud's iconography is very, very, very closely shared with Ballarat, and and some stuff from like you can see this very interesting iconography on any Ilium of, and all around the Shadowlands actually, of these maidens floating towards this center deathbed, and that's also on this on the I think on the suppressing pillar as well. I can't really remember.
I remember you pointing
But
that out to
you see
me.
it. You see it at the Church of Bud as well, most certainly, which is
Wow.
very hard to see, but it's on the Church of Bud as well. So it's like, well, you can clearly date them around the same time period as well. But it's like, what are these in relation to the ruins, and you know what comes when. So, but you can clearly see like copying of different motifs, like the tail-eating beasts that you see in Farum Azula, which are like lamprey creatures, but in any Ilim, they're like those divine, like Chinese guard dogs eating their own tails. And they're weirdly, it's different on either side. You'll see it later in the video, but I found that pretty strange. I didn't really know what to make of that.
Mercy Jessie says, "Oh my God, is the suppressing pillar the central divine tower?"
In a way.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That is really
It's
fascinating.
it's very ancient dynastic coded. Everything on it is the relief on it is exactly the same from the ancient dynasties. And the iconography on the divine towers, some of it does relate back to the ancient dynasties as well, so they're all part of, in my opinion, the same culture.
Wow. Maybe
Yeah.
just from different time periods, you think, or no?
Yeah, well, the divine towers are they're clearly more
Ancient.
extravagant.
Yeah.
Extravagant. I think maybe the suppressing pillar might be the more ancient one, to be honest.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Alright, let's continue.
To become the singular entity that would have dominion over and become the new center point of the One Great, and therefore rule the lands between. In fact, many of the locations we associate with the Erd Tree, like the burial locations, forts, castles, and the Colosseums, I believe, were once occupied and created by a different but related force, and were created for the purpose of nurturing and spreading the One Great throughout the lands between. Not the Erd Tree, but its predecessors, the trees of life and knowledge, otherwise known as the Tree of Death. The Tree of Life is a fundamental archetype in many of the world's mythological, religious, and philosophical traditions. It is closely related to the concept of the sacred tree, the tree of knowledge connecting to heaven and the underworld, such as Yggdrasil, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil in Genesis, and the tree of life, connecting all forms of creation, are all forms of the world or cosmic tree, and are portrayed in various religions and philosophies as the same tree. Thank you, Wikipedia, most scum of resources. And I believe the same is no different for the original composition of the One Great. After my research, I believe it to be an amalgamation of several sacred trees from different cultures and religions. You may not have noticed it in its many forms, but the Tree of Life is very much plastered through the lands between. For example, this is a common depiction we see in many religions of the Tree of Life, and these are from Elden Ring. We have multiple renditions in Farum Azula, such as this, which is tremendously reminiscent of and doubtless drew inspiration from the Tree of Life depiction shown in the Husaby Church, with similar reliefs in El Fael. Or perhaps more convincingly also located in Farum Azula, this tree, bursting with life, from a melting pot of life, different beings being formed as they emerge from it, surrounded by these particular
Oh.
Oh, oops. I was talking this whole time, my mic was muted.
I was like,
Sorry. Have you ever seen, I'm only talking about this because we just watched Alien Romulus in my Discord for movie night. Have you ever seen the murals from the Prometheus film?
yes.
How they're giving, like, something remarkably similar. Like,
Yeah.
they're giving...
So that that image is actually also on the Divine Towers.
Yes!
And it's also on the obelisks in the ancient dynastic ruins. It's actually in a couple of other places, the same vine iconography, but those are the three main places where it's most similar.
I want to see if we can...
Oh, I have a comparison in the video.
Yeah, I I
Oh,
remember
between the
seeing.
alien symbol.
Yeah, like if you look, this is the one from the Divine Tower,
Mm-hmm.
and like there's the fish stuff on it and everything, and it's madness to me.
It is, yeah, it's
There's
so similar. Yeah.
it makes me wonder if they had the same kind of like if there's some crossover in the design team or something. But anyway, anyway,
There's probably some massive mythology behind it, no doubt.
yeah.
There always is.
Little images which seem awfully familiar that we know for sure are plastered absolutely everywhere through the lands between. The sacred tree is one of the oldest themes in ancient Near Eastern art, and this image is very likely inspired by the image of the Tree of Life shown in ancient Assyrian depictions. To me, these many small tree symbols along the outside of the Tree of Life are depictions of the many minor trees that make up this vast network, and we see this represented on many depictions of the Tree of Life. We see this image of a Tree of Life absolutely everywhere in the lands between, and I mean everywhere, often accompanied or even represented by the palmet, or flame palmet. The palmet originated in Egypt and depicts the leaves of a palm, and this symbol was adopted in ancient Greece and is called the anthemion. The Egyptian depictions representing a palm or a lotus is symbolic of the god of creation, Atum, who was said to have created himself out of a palm tree. The tree's ability to regenerate and thrive in harsh desert conditions made it a powerful symbol of rebirth and renewal. Palm trees were often planted in temple gardens and used in religious rituals, with their fronds symbolizing victory and triumph over death. In Greece, the anthemion took on features of other sacred plants, such as the lotus, as well as flame, referred to as the flame palmet. This amalgamation of the palm, lotus, and flame symbolized much of the same, especially rebirth, given the Greek translation of the word palmet is phoenix. Remember that for later. There is a connection to the mythical regenerating solar phoenix and the sacred palm that bore the fruit of immortality. This symbol could very well be the palm as well, however it could also be symbolic of a scallop or seashell, which represents fertility, or the vulva, often depicted at the feet of Aphrodite or Venus, the Greek goddess of fertility and prosperity. And as a side note, the first thing the depiction of the glow-eyed queen on the godskin peeler reminded me of was Aphrodite or Venus. Regardless of which it is, palm or shell, the meaning behind the symbols, regardless, is very reminiscent of one another. And we see this symbolism everywhere throughout the lands between, often in the same proximity as one another, including on gravestones found all through the lands between, from the peaks of the mountaintops of the giants to the Weeping Peninsula, and the sizes vary greatly. Also another one to remember for later. So, sure, perhaps the Tree of Life exists, and okay.
Every time you say later, your Aussiness is so powerful. It sounds like later.
Later.
It's very later.
Don't you dare.
Oh my god! I just saw doggies for the first time. I'm seeing these doggies.
Little dogs, yeah, little creatures. I thought, see in the middle, how it looks like an angry old man's face with a beard. I was
Right
tripping. I was
here?
like, is that an angry old
Yes.
man with two like sleeves going out to the side? Is that like, is that good old Felden? What the fuck's going
There's
on here?
his big nose
But
and his little mouth and his eye.
literally, okay, look, I stared at it for so long and I was like, I'm going fucking crazy. It's not a man. I'm ignoring it. I didn't see it. I'm looking. I was like, I was supposed to focus on the other shit.
No, it's
But like,
definitely
it
a
very
guy.
well. Okay, yeah, all right. Okay, because like I was looking at these. Okay, I was looking at these tombstones, and I was like, that's a face. And I was looking at this tombstone material, and I'm like, that is a skull and a demon face on
A
this.
demon face.
And I went to Swan in the Discord, and I'm like, where is this? Where can I? This is before I was ripping textures, and I was like, where is this texture? I need to see this because that is a demon face, and it's barely noticeable. And he went and ripped it. It was this random fucking like. This random like design of like some type of surface material that they just happened to cut at a certain place in mirror, and it made it look exactly like a demonic face. I have to do a video of just like how trippy some of this shit is, because I still to this day look at it and think it's a demon face. I know it's not now, but I still look at it and I'm like, that's a face.
Yeah, it's so
Like, this
creepy.
100% is. I'll have to show you it. It really sent me. Yeah, it really
Yes, you'll definitely
made me
have to
feel
show
very
me.
ill. Mm.
You know what? You should probably make like a compilation of all those things.
See, the thing here as well with this image as well, you notice, and I was going to note on this, but I thought it was a little bit maybe too much of a reach. But now that I'm looking at it again, I don't know. There's a lot of between two trees symbolism here as well. You've got like a repetition of a tree on either side, or like a branch leading to something central. You've got the man in the center, and what's just beneath him in the middle looks to be a bud or a leaf or something of the sort, like someone rising from a bud in the between two trees. There's so much of it there. So like, it's just like, how much do you note on? Because like those patterns are a big theme in the next video, so I will probably expand on it in there, but like it's just super repetitive, the theme of two trees, so I just literally couldn't ignore it at the end. It's ever since Nameless Singer mentioned it, it's just been living rent-free in my head, and I've been seeing it absolutely everywhere.
We need to get in touch with Nameless Singer. We need to.
She's a beast.
We need to have like a podcast with her and you.
No.
Yes. Yes, we'll have you like two beta fish in a small tank.
She's too powerful. Yeah, we're like those Mexican fighting fish, except I'll just be hiding in a conch shell.
Just eat all your fins off, darling.
Please. I'm fucking jumping out the top of that tank lickety split. Anyway.
Alright, let's continue.
Okay, these symbols are absolutely everywhere. How do we go about narrowing down any of this, or making sense of these connections? Where, or what is, the tree of life that existed before
Yes,
the Erd
actually,
tree?
I'm so sorry to stop it
buckle
again.
up, because
But
I'm
if you
about to
literally look back like a couple of seconds at that armor piece just before that was next
show
to that
you
other part of that armor piece.
Isn't there a way to
You
just
can
go
literally-
back a couple of seconds?
It's terrible. It's so hard because it's such a long video. It's like you skip like a one tiny little inch, and it's like, so you've skipped a minute and a half.
absolutely
have to-
everywhere. How do we go
You have
about
chosen
narrowing
to
down
rewatch
any
the
of
whole
this,
video.
or making
There. So that is the same pattern. See on the left, it's the same like between two trees, and you get the
It
same
is.
swirls with the same
Mhm.
palmettes there. So it is just the same rendition on their armor.
And a
Which-
lot of
yeah.
these swells and like florets remind me so much of like Mikkela's lily. And it makes me
Mikkola,
wonder
the-
if he chose this iconography for himself purposefully.
I'm getting ahead of myself here, but like the thing that really I love with that, with Mikkel, is that if the Halig tree is what I think it is, and he did build the top half only, he has literally, in that whole tree, if that is the case, he has literally created a microcosm of the entire story in that one tree, of all of the past. The whole of it is literally there.
Which is really fascinating because he literally says he wants to embrace the whole of it.
And he was very much seemingly attempting to do so in the Halig tree. Like he's copied. That's the thing. He's copied each and everything that his mother has done, and up to the point of embedding himself into that tree at the end, which is like a grandmother ritual, really, at the end of the day. And yeah, he's copied absolutely everything that she does.
I wonder if he thinks that that's what she's done in the end. Like she's embedded herself in the Erd tree, as opposed to her being imprisoned by the Elden Beast. I wonder if he even knows.
I think Marika has long since abandoned her corporeal form in favor of more formless means.
Mm.
But anyway.
You're gonna get into that later too, aren't you?
Yeah, eventually, in a month or so.
A month or so. We have to wait so long. But okay.
Don't worry, I've got some great videos planned. I'm going to expose Meta's filthy secret too.
You're gonna
Meta is
Meta
a filthy scat enthusiast, and I'm going to expose her.
Did you say
so.
scat enthusiast?
I did. Yeah.
Ugh.
I know, it's dreadful. You don't want to have a good
Fascinating
look
that
at
you
those
should-
birthing chambers, it's really foul.
It's fascinating that you should say that because we need to have a discussion about bats at some point. But
Oh, thank God. I thought you were going to say, I was like, about bats.
Yeah, no, mascara, darling, mascara. No, yeah, bats.
The singing one, the singing bat ladies.
The
They're
singing
great.
ones, but also just regular bats and why they turn up and how they seem to be strangely associated with Marika and the Erdtree. Like they seem to have like some personal shit going on. Which is fascinating. But like look at where
That
they
is
turn
interesting.
up. Look at where they turn
I
up.
haven't considered bats.
Consider it, darling. But okay, let's continue on.
Sense of these
Or we'll literally be here for 5 hours.
connections.
Yeah.
Where or what is the tree of life that existed before the Erdtree? Well, buckle up, because I'm about to show you a lot of associations. This is where the video adopts an entirely different pace.
Oh,
We
shit.
see common themes and motifs and an absence of common themes and motifs between the civilizations and locations in Elden Ring, and I believe their presence or lack of indicate a great deal about the timeline. And as I ventured through all of the locations in the lands between, I came to realize that almost everything, everywhere, is a melding of two ancient locations. I believe these two ancient locations were of the same civilization, but two aspects of that civilization. The divine higher sphere of Farum Azula, domain of the golden ancient dragons, chosen race of the greater will, and their beastmen, stewards of the kingdom of the sun, that governed the lands between and controlled the armies of the Stormlord and Beastlord.
Have you ever run a
No, I have
yourself?
never. No. I'm so sorry. Okay.
And the lower sphere of Elphael, the Deathrite priests, first of the Gravekeepers, the Tibia Mariner, and staff-wielding human royalty and their forces that govern the rites of death and burial, the burning of the body and the guiding of the spirit through burial and water to the great tree roots, with both the Deathbirds and Mariners many ties to the moon and stars. The two locations share similar but uniquely different iconography, as you would expect between two distinct spheres of existence that were related as part of the same civilization. The first is the upper sphere, Farum Azula, that has been crumbling since time immemorial, home to the Elden Lore that existed before the time of the Erdtree. The beastmen there don shields depicting the kingdom of the sun, a kingdom that has long since faded. Like the gold of the now petrified ancient dragons that inhabit this Olympus, imagine these regal beings in their prime, adorned entirely in gold. Now, like the once very vibrant trees of this land, faded and petrifying. It is safe to assume that this sacred mausoleum suspended beyond time, again described as having been crumbling since time immemorial, is perhaps one of, if not the oldest location in the lands between. And following that logic, as such the symbolism found in Farum Azula likely originated there. And where we find the symbolism and artifacts of Farum Azula throughout the lands between would be indicative of its influence, spread, and presence. These forces were represented throughout the lands between by 4 old flags. The flag of the Lord of the Beasts, which is confirmed to be Sarosh, who joined Godfrey, I imagine, after his defeat, and was the Lord of the Beasts in service of Farum Azula before this. The flag of the Stormlord, who I wager may be Gransax, given his size and the weapon he uses being similar to that of the King of Dragons, Placidusax. The flag of the Great Tree, not to be confused with the Erdtree version, which adopted a new colour scheme,
Hello,
and
Vanessa.
some iconography down the bottom was also changed after the fall of the Old Order, and the flag depicting an amalgamation of all of these things. A lion with dragon-looking features and a tree-like tail, adorning the knights and commanders of the Old Order. Given where we find this symbolism, I am led to believe it is indicative of the primary and military forces of Farum Azula, headed likely by the Lord of the Storm and the Lord of the Beasts, who is said to be drawn to lords. After all, we see these very beasts, such as Malekith, in and statues of them in Farum Azula. Allow me to demonstrate the reach of Farum Azula through some of the symbolism and iconography that we find there, that shows up throughout the lands between. Foundationally, the single vine icon that has a leaf nestled by, though hard to see at times, found throughout Farum Azula is also found on the bridges leading to and out of the Divine Towers, every fort in the game, every main castle in the game, Castle Sol, Langdell, Mesmer's Castle, Carrion Manor, Stormvale, Redmane Castle, Castle Morn, the Carrion Study Hall, the Eternal Cities. The X symbol found throughout Farum Azula is found essentially everywhere. The Grand Lifts, Langdell, Carrion Manor, Celia, Ordina, Elphael. We find this lone flower symbol here in Castle Sol, at the very top of the map, and at the Bestial Sanctum at the very bottom of the map. We find this flower symbol in between these locations, from Farum Azula to the Grand Lifts, Langdell, Rea Lucaria, and at the very bottom at the Bestial Sanctum. We also find this exact flower motif in Farum in Langdell, Volcano Manor, and the Eternal Cities and Mausoleums. And speaking of the Volcano Manor, we find the same braziers from Farum Azula, the Bestial Sanctum, and Dragon Communion churches, as well as the Dragon Pit in Volcano Manor, outside of the Temple of Eagle. The pillars are also seen in the catacombs, heroes' graves, Langdell, and potentially some churches and Stormvale. Furthermore, we find the lamprey-esque motifs in some fairly unusual places, such as the Grand Lifts, Langdell, Colosseums, and all over Rea Lucaria, even underneath Renala, of all places. But we also see the depiction of the king and queen from Farum Azula here as well. We find these very coffins all over the lands between.
Another progressive home and auto bundle fully.
This is so embarrassing.
The symbol from Farum Azula, often beneath statues of certain important figures, but with a shield in front of it, even for the dragons. And we see it absolutely everywhere, often held by this woman, but we'll get back to her much later on. The bestial soldiers of this civilization wore outfits adorned with vine motifs, the sun and the kingdom of the sun, and wielded the red lightning of the ancient dragons. The humanoid soldiers of this civilization don ancient dragons on their helm akin to the symbol found on the old flag, and even seemingly a melding of all of the old flags. A draconic looking lion with a tree or floral looking tail.
Okay. So, Scott is going fucking mental.
So, if you go outside of where Renala is, and look towards where you enter the door where you enter, like as soon as you come up that lift and you go directly up, they're at the top of that like keep where she's in.
You want me to go back?
You can if you like. I don't mind. Yeah.
Where was it?
I think it was during the motif, like me showing all of the icons. It would have been towards the end after the lampreys. Yeah, after that, where I was like Renala of all blazes.
Furthermore, we find the lamprey-esque motifs in some fairly unusual places, such as the Grand Lifts, Langdell, Colosseums, and all over Rea Lucaria, even underneath Renala, of all places.
So it's
keep going.
Okay.
Just up to here. Then.
Here.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay, so what were you wanting to know? Elden Dork? Mr. Scott?
Pretty much, Emperor. That's my take as well. A lot of these places existed beforehand. Like Carrion Manor has the tree symbol embedded into the old section of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's all old infrastructure that's been repurposed. Oh, no. The the one on the left, I think, that is in Rea Lucaria. Rea Lucaria.
Yeah, it is. It's on the outside of Renala's chambers. So if you go directly up with the free cam, you'll see it all. You'll see it on each 4 sides of the building.
Which is fascinating because I've always found that particular woman with the headdress and the child, she comes from her name is, she's a Greek bust, and her name,
isn't it the Virgin Mary?
No.
I thought it was the Virgin Mary. I'm pretty sure it is.
What's the name of that Electo?
You're welcome, Scotty. They definitely were he. You're spot on. All the iconography basically confirms that. I didn't really touch on the eagles, which I very well could have. There's so much there for them. Not this eagles or stormhawks, rather, but man, it already went for an hour and 40 minutes. Any longer, and I feel like I would have probably just died.
Here we are. Look at it.
No.
Do you see this? That's Taiki. And we know her in-game is Tish. A lot of people say.
Taiki Tish.
She is a black knife assassin whose mother's name is Electo, who in Greek mythology, Electo and Taiki were both part of the same group of women. They were both part of the... She's usually the daughter of Titans, blah, blah, blah. These women were part of a group of women that would punish nobles who were guilty of abusing their power. Abusing their power over other people. But anyway, she...
Look in its hand, I just sent it to you as well.
Is this the Virgin Mary?
Yeah. Kaitap showed me that.
Oh, the way he's holding his fingers up and stuff?
Little ball too.
Yeah.
In its hand. Yeah. But
I do
anyway,
see
they're
the
modelled
ball.
off different iconic women, I'm sure, so it's
Yeah,
difficult.
but I
yeah,
mean,
that
look at
baby is
this.
very...
Look
It
at
is
it.
so close. And the
It's so
fruit
similar.
as well.
And so, and I think it probably is a conglomerate of both of them. But just the fact that it has the same fucking name. And Taiki and Electo are both Black Knife assassins, and they're both from the same order of Greek women who were, their likenesses was put into these statues. So I think it's 100% connected. And when I pointed this out a really long time ago in Kite's chat, I was so fucking sold on this, and but everybody said what you're saying. Everybody was like, "Is it the Virgin Mary? Is it the Virgin Mary?" And I was just like, "No, you guys, look, it's this." But
well,
you
here's
know,
the
now
thing,
I see
right?
it can be both. Literally.
Here's the thing. I feel like the same with the original, like, One Great Tree. I feel like it's an amalgamation of these concepts. Because after reading about so many sacred trees, I was like, not only do these, a lot of them sound very similar to one another, but this original tree is serving so many different ones of them, especially from the Bible, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge or death. Really, really heavily coded for that. I just couldn't tell if it was the same tree or if it was two trees, but I ultimately clearly went with one choice. Because, I mean, like, at the end of the day, I have another bit of a whack theory about the trees and how many there might have actually been in the first place, but like, I think there might be around 6 of them.
That's incredible. It's incredible. We have so much history to go through.
No. Quick, play it more. We're never going to get through this.
We are never going to get through this.
Never.
There's just so much to say.
Faramazula here as well. We find these very coffins all over the lands between. And we see this symbol from Faramazula often beneath statues of certain important figures, but with a shield in front of it, even for the dragons. And we see it absolutely everywhere, often held by this woman, but we'll get back to her much later on. The bestial soldiers of this civilization wore outfits adorned with vine motifs, the sun and the kingdom of the sun, and wielded the red lightning of the ancient dragons. The humanoid soldiers of this civilization don ancient dragons on their helm akin to the symbol found on the old flag, and even seemingly a melding of all of the old flags. A draconic looking lion with a tree or floral looking tail. as well as familiar iconography. And aside from having powers over the storm, the commander's notably a snowstorm. Some are even capable of using Dragon Communion incantations to breathe fire,
Not you
reinforcing
being
their ties
perfectly
and
business.
service to the ancient dragons.
Looking back at the symbolism used during the spreading of these forces,
I believe the associations come very full circle in this room found in Stormvale. Here we find the armor of the Banished Knights, whose armor bears an ancient dragon atop its helm, and the head wrap and flag of the commanders bears a symbol of a beast, an amalgamation of the beast and dragon of the old flags and potentially, given the nature of its tail, the Great Tree. We see these flags together again in the Round Table Hold, which I believe to have been like the headquarters of Old Langdell, where we find an abundance of Banished Knight armor and weaponry. And we once again find the flags of the Old Order, of the Great Tree, and the Dragon Lord, of all places, in Volcano Manor. Notably, each one of the heroes' graves on a separate one of each of these flags. The dragon, the beast, the tree, though this one appears to have been replaced with its new rendition, the Erd Tree, and then finally the ruling force behind it all. The Two Fingers, envoys of the Greater Will. These hero tombs are also protected by magic that displays the symbol of the Erd Tree, or what I would argue, the age of the creation of the Erd Tree, before the Golden Order. And there are many reasons why I think this came before the Golden Order. For now, I will just say the Finger Reader Enya tells us to become Elden Lord and restore the Golden Order, not the age of the Erd Tree. We find the old flags in many of the same areas I mentioned earlier, the flag of the beast more often than not appearing in churches, which all have the same pillars, flower iconography, and are always accompanied by this tree symbol on the site the church is built at. Even in Caria Manor, which appears to have been built with the buildings themselves, predating the known alliances. The flag of the dragon is displayed in the Round Table Hold and even in Volcano Manor. The flag of the Great Tree, not to be confused with the Erd Tree, is found in Stormvale, and the amalgamation is found wielded by the soldiers, and notably the commanders of the forces, found at the very top near the first unique flower sigil, and at the very bottom, the other unique flower sigil, the eldest commanders being at the top, and the younger or son of that very general, as shown by the naming convention, at the very bottom. I genuinely feel like the location of these unique flower icons and the position of these two ancient commanders is indicative of the origin and destination of the civilization from the top to the bottom. I theorize that Banished Knights and Commanders were the Knights and Crucible equivalent of the Old Order, their forces who built the forts and main buildings throughout the lands between that more often than not hold their weaponry, that share the same vine and tree iconography, whose citadel was Old Langdell with the Round Table Hold as its main castle, all which was later co-opted and built upon by the conquering forces. This Old Order of Knights was likely the first to partake of Dragon Communion, given their abilities and the presence around the Dragon Communion Church in Caelid, with potentially Volcano Manor, which not only has the flags of the Old Order, but also has these braziers, flower symbology from Farum and the Dragon Communion, as some form of headquarters or meeting point for their operations or champions. Very tellingly, and as if a glimpse into the past, if you care to count it, and I don't mind if not, in version 1 of the game, Langdell was actually full of Banished Knights and not Langdell Knights, and there was even a Banished Knight worshipping the corpse of Gransax. So having established connections between Farum Azula and essentially every location in the game, at the end of it, I believe it makes the story somewhat clearer, based on what icons we see where and what ones we do not. Farum Azula's influence was spread throughout the lands between before the age of the Erd Tree, and was undoubtedly tethered to its royalty and military. But there is more to this civilization than its military, and there is another ancient location at the base of an ancient and great tree that is absolutely shrouded in mysterious and unique icons and depictions, found all over the lands between, and concentrated in areas regarding death and divinity. As we travel through the canopy and town of Miquella's Halig Tree, it isn't hard to notice the distinct architecture and colouring, the gorgeous white elven patterns and statues of Miquella and his sister. And so when we transition from the Halig Tree's canopies after our battle against Loretta to the lower levels of this great tree, it isn't hard to notice the obvious change in architecture, material, colour, and reliefs, in place of the white polished elven patterns and statues of Mikola and his sister, which we see no more of. We find an array of bizarre and confounding depictions, as well as many different tree motifs, all presenting a singular tree, and one in particular with newborn life all around it, bearing fruit, and in my opinion depicting the tree of life and its denizens in its infancy, perhaps just as this depiction of the tree of life in Farum, alluding to everything, all life, having come from the tree, and hinting at further sinister knowledge. There is a lot to say about this top area, and the depictions it shows, and the associations and implications of that. And trust me, there are both reasons for why it is there, and a lot to say on it, but for this video, I want to focus specifically on the difference between this area, which seems far newer, far different to the architecture below, with only a few homages to important iconography from the civilization below, and none of its many unique depictions. In addition, if these two areas were truly in fact related, and they are both so grand, why are they separated by a ladder? It's very odd. While the details in this section of the tree contain details from literally all of the ancient civilizations, from Farum Azula, the bottom of Elphael, Rao ruins, the giants, and the eternal cities, I don't personally think this was made during the same period, especially with how all of these designs are a unique variation, and in such a polished, marble-like texture. I just couldn't move on without mentioning this here, because it really did stop me in my tracks. If it was made during the same period, that would suggest that this tree was always a helix tree, despite every single depiction in the area, bar one, which is a bit of a reach, depicting a singular tree. I think instead this section was created by Mikola, and the vast array of ancient iconography demonstrates his understanding of everything, of his roots, of the part all of these civilizations have played in the world we live today, his understanding of the whole of it. That is why we see iconography in this second shoot in a much more modern and preserved material, but that is for another video. It is my argument that this is in fact two trees, much like the Great Tree and the Erd Tree. There are many differences between Mikola's Halig Tree and Elphael, as I just covered, and the conclusion I have drawn is that just how the Erd Tree is something that was grown from the Great Tree, Mikola grew the Halig Tree from the remains of the tree that was originally here. If they were both meant to be the Halig tree Mikola was growing, like a helix such as a Skardu tree, why does it only seem like one side is growing, with new branches all over it, and a closed stump on the end, while the other side isn't growing whatsoever, and is hollow? In fact, this side, I would argue, is a new growth, and is growing very akin to the minor Erd trees in the minor Erd tree church beside Leyndell, and the smaller plants or saplings shown in the ancient reliefs, and is noticeably thinner and newer than the other, thicker stump. Why does sap only come from the side that appears to be growing, while the other is bone dry? Why are all of the reliefs in Elphael of a single tree, and not of a helix tree with one reach of an exception? In fact, on the medallion that allows us passage here, flanked by two unknown kings, and not, say, Mikola, the tree depicted is notably singular. And why is the brace seemingly only built around the middle, hollow, dry stump? Why are there no reliefs of Mikola and Melania after the promenade at the top of the new tree? It is likely because just like Mikola's statues in Ordina, it would look very out of place, as it is of an entirely different material and age. It isn't until the promenade leading to the ancient lower levels of the original tree stump that we see depictions of what once was. And on the other side of this door, with a uniquely tangled vine design, we see hints of the city below, but of a totally different texture, as if made much later. And all of this separated not by a lift or integrated structural design, but a ladder that doesn't even seem to be the intended purpose of this watchtower. I believe because what is happening here is akin to coppicing, where a new tree grows from the stump of an old tree, only on its side. I'm still half and half about this, so if you think otherwise, please let me know in the comments, as I'm open to changing my mind about it originally being a helix tree, like on the interleaved Great Shield, though I have a different opinion on this. But there are just so many indications that it was originally, at least, not a helix, meaning the top section was built far later, and likely by Mikola. I had the same dilemma regarding the great tree of the Erd tree, as the stump to me clearly denotes two stumps likely originating from the same origin, but still likely resulting in a spiral. However, the model clearly indicates a single tree, just like all of the iconography in Leyndell. Both of these trees very well could have been spiral trees, but that detail isn't pertinent to the video, and the main point I am trying to establish is that there were two ancient trees in the age before the Erd tree. Regardless, these are the types of questions I absolutely love discussing, so after the video, please let me know what you think in the comments. So if the Halig tree, or rather Elphael, wasn't grown from scratch by Miquella, then who created these depictions? And what was this tree, enveloped in a city akin to how Leyndell envelops the Erd tree, before Miquella co-opted its corpse? How did it end up this way? There are many unique depictions in Elphael that establish connections between it and Farum Azula, and many other locations in the lands between, but most notably and distinctly the catacombs and tombs, and the divine towers. And I believe that speaks heavily to its nature and role in this civilization. We see vine-like designs strikingly similar but distinctly different to Farum Azula, the type of differences you would expect to see between a higher and lower sphere of a civilization. Elphael's depictions not being quite as elaborate or pristine in many cases, but still of a very high quality, and observably ancient. We see these exact vine depictions in the divine towers, the Giant's Forge, all catacombs and heroes' graves, the Chapel of Anticipation. The flower iconography I mentioned earlier from Farum Azula also appears in Elphael, however we don't see this unique design found in Elphael in Farum, which also appears in other locations. We see it more often than not in chapels, such as the chapel in Castle Sol. Temple of Iglay has an exact copy, Redmane Castle, Carrion Manor, Stormvale. We also see it on the Giant's Forge, Heroes' Graves, Grand
Chapel
Lifts,
Road.
Leyndell's Walls, and Rhea Lucaria, and even possibly the Ul Ruins, where it possibly originated, and or the stone ship coffins. There is this swell motif in Elphael that dons a strange small figure which we see everywhere through the lands between, without the figure. The Divine Tower, Eternal Cities, Ruins on vases, and more. These pillars from Elphael are also found in all ruins, the Grand Cloister, Bestial Sanctum, Rhea Lucaria, Grand Lifts, and the Suppressing Pillar. And these pillars from Elphael are also found on the bridges leading to and out of the front of the Divine Towers and in the Carrion Study Hall. And both of these types of pillar designs are found in Volcano Manor. This chalice, which appears in Elphael 3 times, also appears in Leyndell several times, and also appears in the Shadowlands at the Skardu Tree viewing area. We also see striking similarities between the coffin motifs of Elphael and Rhea
You
Lucaria,
say pause?
but that's for much later. But to really
Did you say pause?
No, I just said that broke me. Those coffins. Those coffins sent
Yes,
me. When
actually,
I
I
noticed
wanna-
that when I was running through the hallways, I was like, what the fuck?
I want to look at them for a second because look at that.
Mm.
I'm sad.
No one can tell me that's not intentional.
It definitely is. You know, Tarnished Archaeologist thinks that this is Miquella with his tree-killing needle. And that he meant to kill the Erd tree in order to, you know, usher in his tree in his age and stuff. It's fascinating.
There is not anywhere near enough weave on that depiction to be Miquella.
Not enough weave of
Not
all
enough
things.
weave.
I
Not a
have no
bloody
clue who it is.
speck of hair.
But if you look at it, don't the arms look like tremendously emaciated? Like whoever that is already
Yes.
dead.
Like the arms of that figure on the top of the heroes' graves.
Yes, like weirdly skeletal. Skeletor.
and Rhea Lucaria, but that's for much later. But to really reiterate just how much
later.
iconography from Elphael is plastered all over the burial locations, especially the heroes' graves, which, may I remind
we get
you,
to see those
Farum Azula
arms.
literally is a burial location. The exact same vine iconography, the exact same unique tree of life iconography, the exact same budding iconography, exact same flower iconography, skull iconography, similar building archaeology to the Church of Prayer in Elphael, and so on. So we can see a connection between Elphael and most, if not all, major locations in the lands between, especially the burial locations, all places that also have iconography and motifs from Farum Azula. And we see these similarities between Farum Azula and Elphael, as well as the melding of their iconography and motifs, all throughout the lands between. I think these relationships are important, and give us insight into the relationship between the higher sphere of Farum Azula and the lower sphere of Elphael. There are many links between Elphael and Farum Azula, especially in the places where both of their iconography appear. Let's go ahead and cover a few.
Everyone who hates ads will be using this Chrome extension
I
by
hate this
2025.
Oh,
I feel
tell
like
me
I just
about
found a
it.
Google cheat code. It's a Chrome extension called...
There is
The fun-
another
I'll just
tree
sort of say here
depiction
before
in
what I was
Farum
trying to,
Azula,
like-
which
What I was trying to do with this whole setup was establish the connections between Farum Azula and all of the places throughout the lands between of Elphael, and all of the associations throughout the lands between. And then now in this section, it's meant to be where Farum Azula and Elphael show up together throughout the lands between.
Yeah.
Because I feel like people got really... they felt attacked by how rapid fire these sort of little sections were, so I just thought I'd split it up into those 3 sections in people's minds, since I don't feel like I did that very clearly.
And you know
Sadly.
what's funny? I feel like I have looked very critically all over the place, from Farum Azula to Lanedale to Elphael, all of these different locations. And I thought that I was looking things over like really, really thoroughly. But I did not draw the delineations from Farum Azula to like the tombs and the catacombs and Elphael. I just didn't see it. But
The only way I saw it was with that bloody board, having them
yeah.
right next to each other. My God, like just
Yeah.
the things that you see, it's like, wow. What the
And now I can see why you and Quaylag and a couple of other people do that. And I think I saw Kite doing it too. So
Yeah, Kite. Yeah, she
I
does
think
little
I really
patchwork
need to-
masterpieces on them. It's
So
gorgeous.
how do you do this? Do you just take screenshots of this stuff and then just like paste it onto a board?
Yeah. So I use I'm thinking of doing a video on how I make lore videos from start to scratch, just like what apps and stuff, because literally anyone could do it. But I use FigJam, FIGJAM, Figma, I think it's called actually, FIGMA.com, and it's just like, it's free. It's just it's like I use that board. You sign in with your Google account and it saves it. You can save local copies. It's so good. It's it's really helped. Definitely helped. But anyway, that's all I just wanted to little interject there to split that up into 3 sections, because there is a lot.
Yeah, no. I just noticed something about this picture we're looking at too. Do you see how this figure's hair starts interweaving with the trunk of the tree and like become one? I wonder if that, and then even the design here in this bit looks a bit like a braid. I wonder if that has some significance in regards to like so many different characters having braids in their hair.
Well, that braid is becoming that tree stump.
Yeah.
Very clearly becoming that tree stump. The other thing that I found very interesting, have you seen the faces of the moon and the sun on the map?
The
Have you
faces?
seen that? Yeah, the faces on the sun and the moon, very haunting. I'll see if I can find
No.
it for you. Give me a sec.
On the map. Listen, guys, we're fucking going in deep here, okay?
I'll send it to you. Hold on, here you go. Yeah, this is the sun. And this is the moon.
Oh.
Now look at the faces on those beasts. Yeah, the moon looks
Okay,
fun.
so I think
I
I
wouldn't
have
like-
seen these, but I never really paid much attention to them. But hey.
They look dreadful, darling. Look, here they are next to each other,
and
but
the
yeah,
bug
I reckon that.
eyes poking
Well,
out.
because the exactly, I think because the it's the kingdom of the sun, but it works in league with the moon, because the things that are ushering death around in the lands between are very moon coded. Like, they only come out at night time in terms of the death birds, and the Tibia Mariners. Like, it's so the moon of the Nox of the moon. The moon was the guide to many stars, and the Tibia Mariner have a pattern of water with stars between it, I think depicting people's souls, and that they're guiding those souls, those stars, through the water to the root. So again, it's all very interconnected with each other, I think. But I think those beasts are sort of a representative of the two aspects of that culture.
Wow.
I just found their eyes. It's funny that the first thing that I thought of when I saw those beasts, when I looked closely at their faces, was those very unnerving moons and sun from there.
It's giving, like, with those teeth, it's giving misbegotten for certain, yeah.
Those
and then that's
weird...
kind of what these look like.
Yeah.
So I can see how you came to that. That's amazing. I would never have taken notice of that.
Has two beasts either side of it. The beasts, especially goats, lions, or birds, flanking a tree of life is also a common depiction in ancient arts across multiple cultures. This depiction is tremendously reminiscent of the two beasts we see either side of this tree in Elphael, which is further reminiscent of the depictions of two beasts we see throughout the lands
Look, it's
between.
Monkaboy.
In the Chapel of Anticipation, beneath many statues of Marika, Mesmer's Chamber, Lane Dell, the ancient dynastic ruins, on the stone coffins, and in the Colosseums. As for the Colosseum iconography, we also find here the flags of the Old Order, but if we actually use these Colosseums via the Shadow Roundtable hold, the flags are adorned with the parties that now respectively own and operate these Colosseums, after the fall of the Old Order, built originally by the Old Order. We also see iconography akin to the flower motifs in which we discussed earlier, with the prevalence of this double swirl as depicted in Elphael, and found throughout the lands between, but lacking the little giant at the top. However, here, we in fact see him present. The hero graves are absolutely laced with motifs from Elphael and contain each rendition of the flag of the Old Order, and are also adorned with the pillars of Farum Azula, the same pattern which shows on the pillars of the fire-breathing imps. The catacombs are also laden with the pillars of Farum Azula, contain the vine iconography of Elphael, and those catacombs and graves contain the very same jars found in the ancient ruins, which is very reminiscent of the pottery that we find in Farum Azula, which contain both Farum and Elphael motifs, but we will discuss the ancient ruins soon enough. Both of them have depictions of a tree bursting with life, with ancient renditions of what appears to be the Tree of Life. Both of them contain iconography of the Eternal Bloom, which is a Tree of Life depiction from the Taj Mahal. There is a baby holding fruit in Farum Azula, just as found on the trees depicted in Elphael. The human soldiers, priests, and dead are wielding a staff, just like the royalty in Farum Azula. Even the Divine Towers have both of their iconography. The pillars from Elphael and the vine from Farum Azula are on the way to the towers. The lamprey tail-eating beast from Farum Azula and the exact vine image from Elphael. And you'll notice a striking similarity between these patterns on the Divine Towers and this inverted Tree of Life from Farum Azula, which we also see in the ancient dynastic ruins, and archways with people floating in them, akin to those in the catacombs and tombs, which, as we just discussed, have iconography from both Elphael and Farum Azula. And a quick relevant side note on the Divine Towers and bridges that lead to them is, if you're going to argue that these are parts of different cultures, as I have seen many argue the Divine Towers are entirely separate to Lane Dell, where do you draw the line? If it is the bridge, then is it the entryway? If it is the entryway, then why do we see the same vine and pathway as used in Farum Azula and Elphael, and not just on the path to the Divine Towers, but on the entryway in front of the doors? That same entryway with the braziers from inside of the tower on them. Those very same braziers that even have the same iconography as the pillars in Lane Dell Colosseum and throughout Lane Dell. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, but back to a few more associations between Farum Azula and Elphael. Both of them appear to be mass graves, and heavily death-themed, with Farum Azula being described as a flying mausoleum donning mass graves with the dead merging into the walls, and Elphael, which has skulls and graves all around it, and is heavily associated with the catacombs and tombs, donning what appears to be a mass grave, with the dead merging into the walls. Tellingly, there are only 2 places in the base game I have found with a concentration of red trees, and specifically these red trees, though the ones in Farum look as though they have been kicked in the gut. And as we move from the bottom of the lands between to the top, we will see the colour of the trees progress, just like the commanders of the Old Order, from young or green in the south, with the only orange trees found nestle around minor Erd trees, to the mid-sphere of the lands between, where we see fields of yellow and orange trees. However, even by the Erd tree, no red trees. It isn't until we go to the furthest point north, to Elphael, that we see red trees. Vibrant and crimson, and the only other place we find red trees is Farum Azula. They are not as vibrant as those in Elphael, but I'd attribute this to the fact that everything in Farum Azula appears to be losing its colour and becoming petrified, as displayed by the dragons and in the trees. So the further north you go, the more red or old, like the commander in the north, the trees are. You can even see a red tinge in these spectral trees. Red trees denoting autumn, the season of death, and many of these trees being pines, which we see a concentration of in Farum Azula. Finally, I would like to return to the Tibia Mariner and Deathbirds and their death priests. The Tibia Mariner are the oldest of gravekeepers. They guide the dead who perished in battle via the war.
Just going to respond to the chat. I can see people talking about the babies. I did just want to quickly note that if from life comes death and from death comes power, then babies really are one of the most, if not the most, important symbols of life. Like, they are new life. They're like the potential of life. They're a symbol of new, like, it literally is new life. So, I mean, you see the shaman women walking, well, the spiritual beast followers, shaman women, whatever, walking around with the infant skull, and they're using that to generate power, essentially. So it's the same sort of concept. And then you see the priests, what were called the putrescence mages, which are not actually called that. That was just a fan-made name. Zuli pointed that out, but they also have little babies nestled up against them, which is super interesting. But I sort of wonder if it is something like they're using them to power themselves, or something equally as morbid. Just like those fetishes that you have that generate all of those, the Omen Briars. Is like a little baby fetish that creates all of those powerful sprites. Anyway, there's a couple of examples I just thought I'd note on the baby batteries.
That's fascinating. The other thing that's fascinating to me is these mariners being present in the world here, but then their ships lit aflame in Mesmer's castle, almost like he made sport of hunting them down because they're doing, blasphemous work, collecting souls and bringing them to the other side.
Oh, poor Mesmer.
Yeah. Oh, poor Mesmer. Okay, here we go.
Water to the roots, and their wood lamp that they use to guide the dead who have died in battle, which is similar to the appearance of grace, such as the red grace-like miasma we find in the north. Perhaps the grace before grace is Helfen Steeple. Throughout the lands between, at places linked by the Old Order, we find renditions of Helfen Steeple, sometimes with a tree in front with small but proportionally gigantic people in front of it, or a lady with a shield with what appear to be potentially wings in the background, standing between 2 trees. Given Farum Azula is one of, if not the oldest location in the game, it is noteworthy that this symbolism shows there so likely originates from there. We see the imagery of Helfen's steeple also in Elphael in multiple locations, and importantly, the coffins in the roots have very important symbols above their heads. I'll be noting on later, which we also see the figures in the moving mausoleums and in Rea Lucaria, and the design echoed in Rea Lucaria and the Chapel of Anticipation. This has Helfen's steeple also adorning it, which makes sense given what it's adorning. While there are many Tibia Marina throughout the lands between trying to guide the souls lost in death after battle, it isn't until we reach the north of the map where all of the red trees are, right by Castle Sol, the stronghold with the oldest commander of the Old Order, and first of the unique flower symbols, that it drops Helfen's steeple. But we will be coming back to this in the next chapter a little later on. All throughout Farum Azula we see references to the twin birds, which are envoys of an outer god. Their children, the Deathrite birds, burned away death indiscriminate in a time before the Erd Tree. We see the Deathrite birds throughout the lands between becoming more complete and powerful the closer we get to Elphael, the exception being Caelid, which is close to the Bestial Sanctum, and the original junior commander of the Old Order, and more devolved the further away from the source or origin. Their iconic Deathrite ritual spear is only dropped in the north, near Elphael, the very same one wielded by the priests of Deathrites who we see embedded in their wings, and I believe on the motifs in the ancient ruins and suppressing pillar. While Farum Azula, the higher sphere, ruled over the One Great, being the Great Tree network stretching through all of the lands between, and dictated the movement of the armies and the royalty of the Kingdom of the Sun, Elphael was the lower sphere, and the stewards of death, home to the priests that manage death throughout the lands between, the Deathrite birds to the twin birds, who would burn away death, and their death priests, who we see in the motifs in the ancient ruins, would follow the death birds, likely collecting the ash to bury in the catacombs by the great tree roots, storing their ashes in urns by the roots, for the spirits to rest, sworn to their solemn duty for the promise of their eventual rebirth. The Tibia Marina, oldest of the gravekeepers, who would guide those lost in death who died in battle through the waterways to the tree roots, or otherwise buried in the catacombs which are covered in Elphael and Farum motifs, guided by the death priest Rosas, though he may have come into the equation later during the age of the Crucible. Rosas's axe has a special that is called Rosas Summons, which is identical to the spell Tibia Summons. He also wields a staff like the figures we see all throughout Elphael and the royalty in Farum too, and its design is also reminiscent of the cycle motifs we find in the ancient ruins. The upper sphere Farum Azula containing iconography of the twin bird, and the lower sphere Elphael containing depictions of its children, the Deathrite birds, in an age where their ghost flame would burn away death, white-winged maidens. After all, these birds do in fact have feathers, and while yes, half of them are dark, half of them are lighter. I would wager that they did not always look like this. After all, how long has it been since they were the ones to operate the functions of death? A really great example that was shown to me by Chocolate Scott, whose YouTube channel you can see here, which I refused to believe at first but was completely won over by, is Placidusax. The Old Lord's talisman depicts the Dragon King in his prime, when he was Elden Lord. Yes, he has 4 heads in this depiction, and many rightly argue that he likely had 5, but I would argue he simply lost one of these heads on his journey to lordship. If Godfrey lost an arm in a war and eventually became Elden Lord years later, would the statue they make of him to mark the occasion have 1 or 2 arms? Anyway, that isn't what I wanted to focus on. What is extremely interesting is the fact that upon closer inspection, Placidusax looks absolutely nothing like he does now. His features appear more wolf or dog-like, not sharp and petrified stone or skeletal. Frankly, Placidusax looks like the dragon from Neverending Story or Howl's Moving Castle here, more than the petrified stone skeleton Dragon King we see today. I guess that's what an entire age worth of time and the loss of 2 more heads will do to you. After all, look what's happening to the trees in Farum. Even the 2 fingers were once allegedly full of vigor. So if Placidusax was once upon a time a...
I love how you said that with like an air of, okay, boomer.
Yeah, I believe it. Let me guess, you ran to school every morning for fucking 3 hours.
And you guys were fantastic orators. Talk about
Full of
Obama.
vigor. Yeah, oh
Effing
my god, I bet your
Obama.
words were great. Shut up.
Fluffier, or at least far more biological in appearance. Perhaps the same can be said for the deathrite birds. Perhaps they were not always the scraggly, messed up version we see today. We do after all see different more or less complete versions of them in the current context. I wonder what they would have looked like an age ago, in the time when they operated death. Perhaps something akin to the depictions we see in Elphael of human-faced, bird-like creatures in pairs, reminiscent of the twin birds, Elphael being the only location that depicts such winged entities, as well as angels, or winged maidens. And in a catacomb at the furthest point south of the map, we find the winged scythe, which describes Death's gentle envoys, the white-winged maidens. And below this depiction, on this very scythe between two wings, is a maiden. Potentially. In some light it looks like she has a beard, but who we know at least certainly has a beard are the bearded men beneath her, very reminiscent of the Tibia Mariner and Deathrite priests on ancient reliefs, the agents of death, and someone else who I will be mentioning later. I genuinely believe these two forces, the Tibia Mariner as well as the Deathrite birds, were the operators of death on behalf of the Kingdom of the Sun. Not only are the twin birds associated with the moon, with Deathrite birds only appearing at night, but the Tibia Mariner's cloaks are adorned with a unique star and water pattern, very reminiscent of the water pattern from Farum Azula and somewhere else that is known to worship the moon. But that is a topic for another video.
No,
Additionally,
it's not.
the
I wanna
DLC
know.
further exemplifies this relationship or pairing by both the theme of loneliness, having the Tibia Mariner creating items to help them cope with their solitude, and the grave birds being created to keep the Deathrite birds company. And the only Deathrite bird and Tibia Mariner found in the DLC are both located in Karo's grave. Lastly, if the hue of Ghostflame was once purple, then perhaps
My
in the
favourite
age of
colour.
their prime, with white feathers and more biological features, the hue of the Deathrite bird's flames were purple. I find it fitting then that the Tibia Mariner themselves are not only purple, but the giants that they summon don an infinity braid ring on their wedding finger,
That's
with what
incredible
looks
that you
almost
found
to
that.
be a purple eye in the middle.
It
Even if that doesn't flesh out, the blue ghost flame of the Deathbirds and purple aura of the Tibia Mariner are in my eyes assuredly a pair, as described by the blue ghost flame bloom, which reads, "Ghost flame flower that grows in gravesites, blossoms in the hidden grave of Karo, of a pair with another gravesite flower, the grave violet," and the grave violet, which reads, "The hue of ghost flame." It's believed to be useful in calling forth spirits. So that should explain by operational standards what I mean when I say lower sphere and higher sphere. Yes, but I also hypothesize this is in the literal sense. I think that just like Elphael, a mass grave, is found at the base of this tree, I believe that Farum Azula, a mass grave, sat at the top of the same tree before it was forcibly removed, which I will also note on later. If the ancient dragons in Farum Azula were at the pinnacle of existence, the flying city, would it not make sense that it would occupy the highest peaks of the highest sphere in the lands between? If their god, after all, is the greater will and the two fingers, given the gift of fingers given to the beastmen as per Sinkadia, the whole fleeing god thing, and the fact the ancient dragons low-key look like they're wearing a finger crown, then it would make sense that in the same area we find the absolute largest and most finger creepers, the most northern, most grand, and most ancient hero grave, has the flags of the two fingers, something seen nowhere else in the lands between. The same area where the Deathbirds are most complete and strongest and drop the Deathrite spear, and the same area where we get the Hellfen steeple from the Mariners. Just like how the trees in the south are a young green, the trees in the Midlands are an aged yellow, and the trees in the north are an elderly red, as seen in this video by the nameless singer, just like the Gold Road moving from north to south, denoting the civilization originating in the north, I have a theory that
Name
these
dropping
giants
Her
were originally
Majesty.
built to accompany
She who
these
cannot be
carriages,
named.
which I think are giant coffins, perhaps used to courier these bodies to this ancient tree. And we see these nodules on their backs with what appear to be ropes tied around them,
Did you see a
with
face in
which
his
I imagine
back?
they once pulled along these carriages.
Did you
And
see
we can
that?
see evidence of this at the abandoned along these carriages. And we can see evidence of this at the green. The trees in the Midlands are an aged yellow, and the trees in the north are an elderly red, as seen in this video by the nameless singer, just like the Gold Road moving from north to south, denoting the civilization originating in the north. I have a theory that these giants were originally built to accompany these carriages, which I think are giant coffins, perhaps used to courier these bodies to this ancient tree. And we see these nodules on their backs with what appear.
Do you see this down here? It looks like eyes, nose, nostrils, mouth. Do you see that?
You're gonna send me down the same schizophrenic rabbit hole.
Yes!
Looking at textures on the surface and
Tell
on
me
you.
why I get so many adverts for schizophrenic medications when I'm watching your videos. Anyway,
I don't
appear
have
to be
tell you
ropes
anyway.
tied around them, with which I imagine they once pulled along these carriages. And we can see evidence of this at the abandoned coffin cliff, where we find lots of these abandoned coffins, and right beside them, without any weapons anywhere, these giant golems, as the carriages all face the direction of the mountaintops, with
They
exception to
do.
one that follows the path to Volcano Manor. And the very last one we see in the consecrated snowlands ends its journey right next to Ordina, which
so I have one question.
Mm.
Oh no, never mind. It still makes sense. It's incredible to me that you made that connection because, you know, I did this too. I followed every single one of them to where they go.
Mm.
And I couldn't make the connection that maybe they were all going to the fucking Hailing Tree.
Well, that's the thing,
but it
right? I
makes
was
so
like,
much sense.
well, two things. I find it interesting that the only carriage that deviates from that pathway goes to Volcano Manor, and Volcano Manor just happens to have all of these really interesting connections to Farum Azula with very unique iconography there that, like, you know, like the braziers, like that very specific flower motif that only shows up in Lane-Dell and also Farum Azula, and a lot of it around the Temple of Eagle as well. But I found that very, very interesting that the only carriage that's deviating goes that way, because every other carriage, the front of it is facing, even the ones in Lane-Dell, on the roads leading out of Lane-Dell towards the lift, even those ones are facing out, like towards the outside of the city, towards the mountaintops of the giants. So it did make me wonder if maybe the lifts originally were made to sort of accommodate these carriages. If they predated the wars, if they weren't made during the wars, then perhaps they were made to accommodate. Well, it's difficult because where those coffins and stuff are, where those giants are, they're coming up from the rune-strewn precipice, and they're all like abandoned there, and it looks like they were travelling uphill. So it makes me wonder if perhaps that area was affected by meteorites too, because it looks like there may have been more there, because it looks like the carriages were coming from that direction, which is... I might have to have a better look around there, because there might be some evidence of destruction at the bottom of the precipice, which I've not really, admittedly, not looked at very, very, very hard. But the carriages that I did follow, again, they're all pointing towards this destination, and the fact that it stops right by Ordina, which the bridge in Ordina where the gate is that takes you to where the Halig tree is, looks like to me it's the direction that it's pointing is directly towards the center stump of what is now the Halig tree, which would have been the old stump of the old tree, and it looks like it's going directly, and that the buildings in Ordina, to me, and the makeup of Ordina would make more sense connecting to that old portion of the tree, and is still Eternal City coded, unlike the top of the tree in Elfale, which looks newer, but is also Eternal City coded.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah, I agree with you. The other thing I think is fascinating about this is, so you know how Morgott, he has his Black Knights hunting us strategically in
Mhm.
certain locations where he believes we will, pass by. He's got 2 of them with this particular carriage.
Yeah. No, I don't know why these carriages are still operating
Yeah.
now, by the way.
But that
Doesn't
that
make a lot of sense to me.
That signifies that Morgott himself knows about the carriages, knows they're still operable, and wants this one in particular escorted to the Halig tree.
It is very strange, especially since the other thing that would link them to that old culture is not only the iconography on it, which will be in the next video, but the iconography on those carriages is very, very interesting. But the fact that it does sort of look like those golems, which would have been made in the era of the giants, look like they were what was carrying these things. They've got all of those ropes on their backs, which have been severed. And those carriages have ropes on the front of them as well.
Wow. That makes so much more sense, than having slave labor with things stuck through their freaking spines.
Yeah, it's a bit more sightly as well. And given all of those golems that I showed earlier that are scattered around all of those abandoned coffins, none of them have any weapons. There's no weapons anywhere.
So there's another parallel that I wanted to draw here, which I think is fascinating, and this is all stuff I'm gonna write this all down. I'm gonna show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna bring it to you. We need to collab. George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. There is reason to believe that the world that we are currently dwelling in the time of A Game of Thrones with Daenerys and the dragons and everything, is a post-apocalyptic world where once there was tremendous technology that's no longer available. And if you read a lot of his fantasy and science fiction, you can see like the parallels of how that sort of thing could have happened. What's really fascinating to me about Elden Ring is that it's hard to tell which places are oldest, and sometimes the places...
It is very hard to tell.
The places that you think might be newest, it's like mind-boggling to think that there's a possibility that they could actually be some of the oldest things here. Like,
I mean, especially when you look at like places like that are above ground that look older than the places that are below ground in the lower stratas, like the Eternal Cities. It's like, well, is that just because they're tarnished because they've been up in the sun and the elements longer than these things? It is very, very difficult. And then you have structures underground in those sorts of cities, like these elevators, and you're like, when did they build that? Have they always been underground, or did they build that to escape the underground? It's very difficult to sift through and get answers to. That's for bloody sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Fascinating. So these are all things that we need to like write down and keep track of because they're worth talking about.
Which I believe at one point may have been connected to the original tree.
The darkness of bipolar depression made me feel like life was moving on.
Before a disaster happened.
Every
Just
ad
like
had
the
more
unique
meds.
flower
We get
symbology
sued.
showing north and
They're like,
south,
"Ma'am,
just like the
excuse me, you are
youngest
not
commander
sponsored."
being in the south and the eldest in the north. Even the smithing stones seem to represent the north as containing the most ancient and powerful relics, with the smithing stones right before the ones identified with the ancient dragon scales, the ones referencing and insinuating that they came from Farum Azula being specifically described as being located in polar regions, and mostly found in the north. Would it not make sense that the ancient sacred mausoleums be located past the ancient boughs in the consecrated or sacred snowlands, engulfed in a storm, a snowstorm like the commanders of the Old Order are able to wield? And just visually, the way Farum Azula is structured suggests to me it was at some point structured around something. given the red trees appear to be found high up, or north at least. Given there are tree roots all over Farum Azula, it's easy to picture a tree going through its center here, instead of a tornado, like a bird's nest reaching towards the sun, and it would have looked like the sun at the peak of this tree, with all of the golden dragons. And for a sense of scale of how large this tree may have once been, consider that not only is it already growing to the peaks of the mountaintops, but that those mountaintops are home to the most ancient and largest boughs in the game. Dead though they may be, a collection of trees this size, scale, and in such proximity is seen absolutely nowhere else in the base game, above ground at least. The closest maybe would be the forest south of Leyndell, whose largest trees only maybe reach the height of the smallest of what's left of these ancient trees, and comparable only to the forest of Midra's Manse in the DLC. As a further note to the relationship is the shape and form of the rune shown in Farum Azula. I've heard many insinuate that it's meant to represent tree roots, and wouldn't it fit nicely that the tree at the top of the map would have its roots journey down and spread throughout the lands between. But
Sorry,
No, it's okay, it's
especially since we're literally just past it. But that rune, if you look at it before it starts overlapping with the map, maybe if you just press left on the arrow on the keyboard, it'll put it back like 10 seconds.
Hey, that
And then
works.
play it. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
at the top of the map would have
So
its
pause it
roots
there.
journey down.
So see up the very top where Elfael is. The land, this is hella schizo by the way, but the land is literally in the same shape as that rune at the top of that. Do you see how it's like
I
the
do, I
basin
see it.
of the rune? It's where the bounty is meant to collect. And then the bounty,
Wow.
right, is souls, which go through the Great Tree Network. And so the bounty collects at the top and it's distributed. Or the other way around, it's drawn through the roots to the top. But either way, I feel like it's a pretty damn good analogy. It's got literally the base in the same arc at the top, and then Elfael at the top of that, where all of this death is going to be collected, like these two grand mausoleums. So really the bounty does quite literally accumulate there, if I'm right. But I just feel like it's just an extra compliment to the imagery, really.
It does make sense, especially when you put all of that together with... Have you ever looked at the image of Miquella with Consort Radon and looked at it
with the
right
hair.
next to this?
Yep.
It's such a magical
Yep.
superimposition, and now you've done it with the map as well, and there's the Halig tree. I feel like
Yep.
it's undeniable.
It is undeniable, 100%. Yeah.
I think you're definitely onto it. You know what? Praise Miquella.
Praise Miquella. Need to start that church. Anyway.
We do. Shadows of Light.
And spread throughout the lands between. But there are more reasons that compel this thought in me, and that is that at the very top of this depiction of a great tree in its prime, that has a tall and thin stature, much akin to the tall and thin stature of the dead tree in Elfael, that is striking in resemblance to the tall and thin dead tree we see on the belfries, and in front of Leyndell on the spectral banners, the only other spectral trees we see being the tall pine trees of the north, and the other tree depictions with a canopy reaching down towards its base, we see something perched in the very top.
Progressive Commercial Insurance offers affordable small business protection. You can receive discounts on commercial...
With a regal floral decorated crown beneath it. This object invokes the imagery of both the Helfen steeple depiction above the entombed figures, and the pot that the Tree of Life is seen bursting from in the depictions of Farum Azula. And you'll note that this pot looks like a flower, which makes sense given we see flower iconography all over the crown and construct, having even the same points or edges on the tops of them. On the secret medallion that takes us to the path leading to Elfael, the same depiction is shown at the base of this tree, including the archways. And while it's very hard to get a clear image of, you can see at the very top of the construct on the medallion, points, likely depicting the city of the priests.
Scum!
Even the crown of the bearded staff-wielding giant kings on the talisman leading to this ancient mausoleum, much like those we find in Farum Azula, again, not Miquella, looks akin to the depiction. I believe this represents Farum Azula, a sacred grave for dragons, the divine creatures, sitting atop this tree, both depicted by the same looking object on the medallion and the Lord's throne, the mausoleums of the upper and lower spheres. This tree reminds me of the one with small 8 infants crawling all around it from Elphael, reflecting that lineage in its prime, during the prime of this tree.
Points.
Now bearded men, the priests of Elphael. Finally, if I'm right about the fact that this was originally such an important and grand tree, then what the hell happened to it? The reason, aside for now...
6.
6?
Yeah, which also makes sense.
Plus the center one.
The suppression pillar
would be 7.
You see that image there on the left? I mean, well, if you want to take that a step further, then you could take the Carrion Study Hall as the 8th, but again, I'd still take it as 6 Divine Towers because of the array that they're in. But regardless, see that image on the left? That actually had me, like, full on gagged.
Which one?
I thought, this is dumb, I'll just put this together and see what it looks like. The throne and the medallion on the left-hand side. That actually, how well that fit, kind of like blew my mind personally. I was just like,
stunning.
that is ridiculous. That fits so well. Like, it just looks like it's meant to be there. I'm a bit disappointed with that image on the right. There's a much better angle I could have taken to make that look better, but I mean, the point still gets across pretty well, I think.
Yeah, no. And the other thing is that you can see the likenesses, not just with Farum Azula and the storm and Elphael and the tree, but also Enir Elim. And just the weird thing about people being sucked into structures and making up the foundations of it. Like, in Farum Azula, it's the dragons, and Enir Elim, it's some unspeakable stack of people. And up at the Divine Tower itself, it's all like people stacked up there. And it makes you wonder, like, so when Marika approaches it, somebody needs to, I want more. Anyway, when Marika approaches it, it's all viscera that's like fresh and squelching as she walks across it. And there's like blood splatter on her arm, you can see. How much of Enir Elim was bloodied like that? And like, was it her that did that, or was that how they make the tower? Like, it's so fascinating.
No comment.
No, you have to make a comment, just not now.
Exactly. In a month.
A month? You make us wait forever, darling.
I must.
Oh, I can't bear it. But okay, let's play.
I think that also may possibly link Farum and Elphael, as we know for certain that Farum Azula was struck by a meteor, and that led to its current state. And much like how the Eternal Cities were assailed and devastated by an Astel having invoked the ire of the Greater Will, located in the peaks of the consecrated snowlands about the same distance from Elphael as the Astel that destroyed Noxtella, is an Astel. It is my theory that this tree was devastated by this Astel to stop the Great Tree Network in its tracks and put a pause to the Greater Will's mistake, after the rise of the Fell God. As for the debris of Farum Azula appearing everywhere south of the mountaintops and not in the mountaintops of the giants, if this tree was originally, say, the size or similar to the Erd tree, given what I previously said about its location and the trees in that area, and a meteorite struck it, I couldn't imagine the fallout. I imagine it had turned the surrounding area into nothing short of a wasteland. How far would it go before it struck the ground, and how much of it would have fallen into the chasms below? Did it float for a while before landing, as Farum Azula still is, as other impact sites of meteors do when struck with asteroids? The ruined greatsword, which appears to be a fraction of Farum Azula, stating it was struck by an asteroid, is imbued with the power of gravity as a result of having been struck. The demonstrated asteroid is imbued with the power of gravity.
No.
A fraction of Farum Azula, stating.
Do these look like scrawlings?
Yes. I ripped the texture off of them, and it's very interesting.
You're going to go over that, yes?
in a month.
Damn it, Scum! Alright, okay, here we go.
Hitting it was struck by an asteroid is imbued with the power of gravity as a result of having been struck. The demonstrated gravity anomalies at impact sites leaves plenty of room for interpretation on this point. I believe the direction of this hail of stars is consistent with the appearance of what Tarnished Archaeologist identifies as being from the splashes of magma on the Divine Towers, like a meteorite shower, a founding rain of stars. Though he noted there was no consistent evidence between the direction, I would disagree, as if we take into account the direction of both our stels, where they are from their intended target, it seems to me to match the sides the debris appears on the Divine Towers. As for the forge, I'd think it'd more likely be overflow, given where we see this magma-looking material are pretty much exactly where these cracks in the forge are. Aside from the associations I mentioned earlier, why would I say Farum would be above this tree specifically? Why is this tree so slender compared to the Erd tree and depictions of the Great Tree? I have my reservations about Farum Azula atop this tree as much as I do about Elphael or the Great Tree of Leyndell always having been a helix tree, so I'm open to changing my mind, as Leyndell is a tremendously Farum-coded area, smack bang in the middle of the two unique flower icons near the commanders of the Old Order. Where Farum ultimately is located doesn't impact the video much, but I have my own theory and I will explain why I think what I do. And I do look forward to seeing what you have to say in the comments. In addition to the other two reasons and associations I stated, a main reason for my theory about Farum Azula and the fact that there are two trees that comprise the One Great is due to what I consider to be one of the most unmentioned and overt secrets in the game, and what led to the downfall of the One Great. The flaw in the design, the mistake by the Greater Will, leading to fractures in the One Great network. The fruit of the One Great, of the Tree of Life and the Tree of Knowledge, also referred to as the Tree of Death. There are numerous religious tropes and inspirations in Elden Ring. Even the Tree of Life, as it were, in Elden Ring is drawn from many real-life inspirations, and we see its depiction in every corner of the game. So, given I am advocating for the existence of one great tree network operated by two main trees of life and death, you can imagine, based on what I just showed you, how perplexed I was about where to even start with this. Which tree was the tree I was looking for, which would give me insight into the One Great of the lands between. And after reading about a dozen or so sacred trees and the mythology surrounding them, I realized that the likelihood was that it was inspired by and included elements of multiple of them. When I was pondering where the first of the Great Tree Network was, of course, I originally began at Leyndell, given the enormity of the Great Tree stump and the lack of any other real contender, and the unique, ancient nameless city by its decaying bough. But after I investigated Elphael, and well, you've heard all about that, I was heavily conflicted about the original Great Tree, as both of these locations were prime candidates, given their enormity and context. And then, during my pinballing between these locations and Farum Azula to try and make sense of it all, I noticed something that caught my eye in all locations. And once I saw it everywhere. This confirmed for me my initial suspicion that there was perhaps more than one tree involved. Depicted in Leyndell and some other locations, we find two intertwining branches with different leaves and different fruit. The same variation of fruit we find depicted on this tree in Elphael, the round fruit at the forefront and the berry-like fruit in the background. I would argue, just like the veil being tore back, this is to symbolize that they are part of the same system, of the One Great.
If I say she's an icon, she's an icon.
She is an icon.
Takes an icon to know.
But belonging to a different tree. Like this interleaved tree shield, which is the same tree linking in its canopy and existence, just as how I see the One Great.
When you said,
I think this is literally what we see in this image in Elphael.
Is there a face in the moon?
That are of the same root system and an important part of one another. Two trees, one shared existence.
That's a very good analogy.
Two trees,
for the
one
Great,
system. And we see a tree depicted here in Elphael, depicting the berry-like fruit we see the lamprey eating when they transform, with a canopy reaching the bottom of the tree, much like the depictions of the tree with the crown and steeple, and like the dead tree imagery in Elphael. But is this a fruit or berry, or something else? If we revisit this depiction I showed you earlier, you'll notice this very handsome birdman, who symbolizes the enlightened man in Mesopotamia, is holding something. He's holding a pine cone. Yes, a pine cone. Did you know that the Pope has a pine cone on his staff? And that there is a giant bronze pine cone in the Vatican? Or that the staff of Osiris, the Egyptian god of life, death, fertility, resurrection, and rebirth, also has a pine cone on it, flanked by intertwining serpents? I did not. Apparently the pine cone, which is a seed-bearing fruit, is used in many cultures to symbolize human enlightenment, the third eye, and the pineal gland. Conifer pine trees are one of the most ancient plant genera on the planet, having existed nearly 3 times longer than all flowering plant species. The pine cone is the evolutionary precursor to the flower, and its spines spiral in a perfected Fibonacci sequence in either direction, much like the sacred geometry of a rose or sunflower, or the pattern hidden under evergales. Our pineal gland, shaped like and named after
Just got a comment saying whether or not that was a flower or it was a pine cone, I think in relation to the 2 branches, and I think this section kind of sums that up in relation to the pine cone being the precursor to a flower. And Lanedell coming after, obviously, the upper sections of Lanedell coming after Farum Azula's creation, at least, so which is where the pine cone is showing up in those reliefs more so, and Elphael. Whereas Lanedell does have a lot more flower iconography, which makes sense.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that there's so many bits of reliefs and iconography that have dual representations. I wouldn't be surprised if both the pine cone and the bud are relevant.
Well, it's just like, well, no, they both definitely are relevant.
One, well, no, I mean, like, when you're looking at what you are calling a pine cone, and this person, I think it was Apollo, said that maybe it's a bud, a flower. What I'm saying is, interchangeably, they could both be relevant as what you're looking at there.
Yeah.
In the same way that it could be Electo, it could be Taiki, it could be Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad. But I love the pine cone thing, to be honest.
That Fibonacci sequence on the left actually reminds me of the pattern on the front of the commanders of the Order. And also the pattern on the bottom of the... I keep going to say gondola, but I know they're the boats. Gazebo. The gazebos in the Rao ruins. The pattern on the bottom of them looks exactly like that. I'm just going to note that down actually for later. I didn't even think of the Fibonacci sequence.
That's nuts.
Yeah, fun.
Geometry of a rose or sunflower, or the pattern hidden under evergales. Our pineal gland, shaped like and named after the pine cone, is at the geometric center of our brain and is intimately linked to our body's perception of light. The pineal modulates our wake-sleep patterns and circadian rhythms, remains uniquely isolated from the blood-brain barrier system, and receives a higher percentage of blood flow than any other area of the body, save the kidneys. It is considered by many to be our biological third eye, the seat of the soul, the epicenter of enlightenment.
Find the right recliner. You're a happy camper. Just look at me, thanks to my new Shack Lazy Boy recliner.
And its sacred symbol throughout history in cultures around the world has been the pine cone. And where do we find spectral fields of conifer pines, with ancient boughs boasting height unseen, and the site of an ancient divine art, requiring, I would assume, divine knowledge, or enlightenment. Why the north? By the destroyed great tree of Elphael. While they are clearly the most interesting in the north, being so uniquely spectral, the pine trees aren't the only trees we see in the lands between, nor even the north. In fact, we see these trees, which may have at one point been the very same tree we see in Elphael and Farum Azula, splitting at the base, and then again multiple times to meet eventually in the canopy like the interleaven tree. I had a realization that throughout the lands between and the DLC, especially in Farum Azula and Elphael, we see mostly the same type of trees everywhere. Mostly conifers like yew and pine, and many oak. We also see many aspens in specific places as well. All of these trees are depicted as a sacred tree in one culture or religion, and the themes between them are very similar in many ways. We see the pine and oak close to one another in the north, which I imagine the original great trees were like, perhaps one of each, or each an amalgamation of both. And now we see an abundance of the poplar tree, likely being the trees of the Erd tree. The new blueprint for the One Great. In Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which heavily inspired George R.R. Martin, there are two divine ancient trees, the two trees of Valinor, known as the trees of the Valar, or simply the two trees were Lorelin, the gold tree, and Telperion, the silver tree, which brought light to the lands of Valar in ancient times. They were destroyed by Melkor and the primal spider, but their last flower and fruit were made by the Valar into the sun and moon, much akin to the lower and upper spheres of the Old Age, the kingdom of the sun and the agents of the moon. This to me is also very reminiscent of the trees of life and death. Much like my good friend Jack is a Mimic pointed out, there are trees on the cerulean and crimson flasks. I think that these are two different trees, bearing two different fruit. One a flask of vitality or life, and one a flask of mana, or divine knowledge of intelligence, mind, and the divine. We see this iconography of two trees all throughout the lands between. I first heard of this idea of the between two trees iconography when it was brought to my attention by the peerless nameless singer. Again, definitely check out their channel. Her hair holds an unfathomable amount of secrets, and she is about to start her great march. We see this between two trees symbolism on the imp statues in catacombs and other locations, and also the Rao ruins. And I've managed to find this between two tree symbolism in a couple of other locations, like out the front of the Grand Lifts, and this inverted version in Elphael. So while there may have been two trees in the equation of the one great, one that had dominion over life, and the other over divine knowledge and death, then perhaps like the story of the two trees from Lord of the Rings, one was a male and one was a female, one bearing fruit and one seed, and they were married in the form of the One Great. The priests of Elphael travelled south, spreading the seed of the One Great, building the catacombs, and eventually the nameless eternal city was established at the base of the first tree after the sacred mountain tops, perhaps as the foothold in this mid-sphere of the lands between, just as Telperion came before Lorelin, if only just. My best guess would be, based on the information presented, that there were two trees, perhaps whose canopies interleaved, who were of the same network and stock. They were an amalgamation of all of the trees, which are all connected to the Great Tree Network, as shown by the respective resin descriptions. One of these trees was the Tree of Knowledge, whose fruit or seed we can see being consumed by lamprey-like creatures, leading to its transformation, potentially into a bird or a dragon. Both this pine-like fruit or seed and this transformation into a bird symbolizing enlightenment, who then would perhaps spread the seed of the Great Tree as we see in real life and mythology. This was the produce of the Tree of Divine Knowledge, something mortals were forbidden from partaking in. The other tree is the Tree of Life, whose fruit was life itself, and from which all life came, essentially soul fruit. In the Bible, this is the tree which Adam and Eve are allowed to eat, the tree which grants long life and youth, even immortality. The tree whose fruit I would give up literally everything just to have a little nibble of. Unlike the tree of knowledge, which grants the divine knowledge of good and evil, but also death. The fictional 4th century letter of Alexander to Aristotle tells that Alexander, during his expedition to India, visited a grove with 2 holy trees.
See how I use an ad blocker? Very mindful, very demure.
God,
I'm not
I'm
watching
not
ads
being
like the
very
rest
mindful.
of you.
I'm not being very
Inside the
mindful.
grove, he met a priest of more than 10 feet tall, who explained that one tree was male and could speak the Indian language, and foretold one's future at the rising of the sun. The other tree was female, could speak Greek, and foretold one's future at the rising of the moon. In illustrated copies of this narrative, the oracle trees are sometimes conflated with the dry tree, another tree that Alexander visited, in whose branches he found the phoenix, a legendary self-resurrecting bird, reminiscent of the flaming palmet imagery we see all through the lands between. Vincent of Beauvais stated that the balm of the trees allowed priests at the grove to live for 300 years. The 14th century Polychronion of Ranulph Higden attributed their longevity to the tree's apples. A unique Middle English translation of the Polychronion describes the trees as follows. The trees of the sun and moon are in India, and by their apples priests live for 500 years. The conflation of the balm and the fruits, both granting blessings of long life and grand stature, seem to be similar in nature to the effects of Erd tree sap, which is in essence a more controlled version or corrected design of this distribution of power, and the fruit of the 2 great trees granting those who imbibe it grand stature, power, and vitality. As we see in Godfrey and his knights, and as I am arguing, as we see in the giants from engorging the fruit.
What did you notice?
Did you know? You know, like, look at those. Just like tap the back key once to go back like 10 seconds. And then play it and pause it when it zooms in on the flasks at the top of them.
And his knights, and as I am arguing, as we see in the giants from engorging the fruit.
Maybe it needs to be further back.
Yeah, there. Play it for a little bit and it'll zoom into the... Oh, actually, leave it there. Leave it there. That tree looks like it's got another tree crossing over it.
Yeah, the one that gives you knowledge.
Both of them.
Oh, they both do, yeah. Almost like the shadow tree.
Yes.
So,
Anyway.
But is it possible that it's the same tree fruiting different fruits at different times?
It's just very interesting. Oh, very, very possible. Like one could be like a seed and one could be a fruit, but there's also the again, that's why I said it was very difficult to tell if it was 1 or 2 trees, because then you have that image in Elfale as well, where it has the pine cones in the background, and then in the foreground it has the round fruits. So it's like, it is difficult, but I had my reasons for believing it was 2 trees.
Yeah, no, the 2 trees.
And I think the placements of the 2 astels, man, that just really, it does help me in my mind, yeah. With that there were 2 astels and 2 trees. Not necessarily that the second astel was near the Erd tree, or like where that great tree was, but just the fact that there are only 2 and they both assailed the Eternal City. Like, one of them assailed the Eternal Cities and one of them is located at the top. I've also always found it weird how they've described the Eternal City as singular in some instances, but there's clearly 3 of them. But I've always thought that each Eternal City, I mean, my major fringe theory really is that each Eternal City was originally built by a great tree.
I kind of don't think there are 3 of them. I think there are 5.
Yeah, well, possibly 6, but at the very least, there were 4, which was Elfale, and the 3 that were by the Eternal Cities.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Okay.
Because, like, you can go into whether or not the Jagged Peaks or, like Volcano Manor and stuff a petrified wood or not, and there's a bloody good argument for that being the case. But I mean, I don't know enough about that to make any further comment. Like they're sort of just they're in my periphery, very much so. But like the ones that I can pretty much in my head, in my like in my little headcanon, I can confirm is that, like, for example, if you look obviously you have the Great Tree Stump at the Nameless Eternal City, but then near Nock Stella you have Ray Lucaria, which beneath it has that giant, near the Lake of Rot, there's a giant humongous crystals. Yeah, and if you look around at the stalagmites around it, look very akin to around the Great Tree Stump, there are smaller trees or roots growing up by it, near it, and they look like they're growing up supporting it, but regardless, the point is on the map, they look very similarly positioned to where the stalagmites are. And then, I'm probably saying that wrong, by the way, and then if you look at
stalagmites,
yeah, I always fuck up that word. If you look at the Eternal City of Nock Stella, then Nockron rather, down the bottom, you have Mogwin, which that entire area looks like a giant tree, and if you look it on the map, it does look very much like a giant tree stump. And in each of those locations, in each instance, they're located near a point of like power. Like if you look at the heart of Aeonia above where Mogwin would be as well, again it's giving tree stump. And really to hammer that home further, I know it's probably in relation to Melania's Bloom, like obviously, but like there is what looks to be that same structure that you'd expect to grow out of the top of a coppiced tree stump in the heart of Aeonia, which looks like the shoots coming off of a tree stump. So, but again, that's like, I mean, the whole area's been nuked, so information is difficult to gather thanks to Madame Portable Nuclear Reactor. But anyway.
Yes.
Anyway, I digress. My apologies.
No, this is what we're here for. It's fascinating, and I hope that you, as you are having these thoughts, are like
I'm
penning
writing
them down. Oh yes.
No, I 100% do. That little Stardew Tree little iconography there is.
I expect them coming out of my monitor in a month.
Depends on how much you'll, well, it depends on you.
I know, right? How much I distract you. By the way, everyone present, the reason why you had to wait so long for this video is not my fault, but Scum will try to convince you that it is.
At least 25% of it is this video.
No, anyway. at least 25 hours of it is maybe my fault, but the rest of it is all just Scum being Scum.
Life. I needed to make sure I had it all, you know?
Anyway. It's a lot. You put so much in here that I have not seen anyone else put together. I
wanted it to be like, even if you didn't agree with anything that I said, which is the case, was like, I honestly can't believe how positive the reception was for this. Like, it still is actually shocking me. I've been telling people that I do not expect it to get many views. It's an hour and 40 minutes long, and like, there's a lot in it, but like, it's surpassed every expectation I had, so that's very encouraging for the grandmother video, because it's much the same thing, but I want to spend a good amount of time on making it very cinematic. I know Banoon, I don't know if Banoon is still lurking about, but it's good to have someone that's hypercritical of black screens and stuff that can point out stuff like that, because I want to make sure that's all erased for that last video. I need someone with that that eagle eye for nitpicky stuff like that. Definitely. So
I hope you do work with her, because she made a really good, I mean, you already know about it, her dragon videos. She made really good dragon videos.
I've been threatened twice today about Grand Sax already.
Banoon, darling, are you going to do a video on the big giant red dragon? Because I need you to do a video on the big giant red dragon in the DLC.
Well, if you want like something to look at in regards to the big red dragon, then perhaps you should look at I think there's a shield. I forget which shield it is, but it has a gigantic red dragon on it.
I think I know which shield you're talking about.
I forget what it's called, but I definitely have a picture of it on my board.
Is Grandsax the name of it? Oh no, she's talking about her video. Yes.
She's just proclaiming Grandsax with hearts, which is nothing new for Banoon.
I don't know what to say. I want to, but I don't have enough information yet. Yeah, it's so hard to get information on that dragon. But I feel like people who can free cam have a distinct advantage in that regard. And I also think the gigantic weapon piercing the back of the skull is very telling.
Well, the only other weapon you see that's as gigantic as that is the spear that's piercing the dragon's head near the altar. It's not the same shape, obviously, but it's the same stature.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, like, who could possibly wield that? Maybe another dragon, or maybe those giants are swallowed by the earth.
Granny.
Those giant figures. But yes, Banoon, dying for that video from you, darling. And thank you for helping Scum.
Because when you think like about big spears, there's someone else that's wielding a gigantic spear in that city.
In that city?
In Lanedale.
Okay. There is someone else who's wielding a giant spear, but
the Tongue of Kali.
Who do we think that is?
No idea, darling. I guess I'll have to make some speculation in a month or so.
Grandsax is the one who would be able to wield that weapon. Oh.
Yeah, Grandsax is pretty buff.
Oh, and that makes sense because Grandsax is an ancient, gigantic dragon, and that thing is like an ancient, gigantic drake. But the interesting...
Oh, yeah.
The interesting thing... yeah, literally a kaiju battle. The interesting thing about that drake is... that drake is even bigger than Grail. Isn't it?
I wonder how big comparatively the drake head that's in Farum Azula in that church is, because that's not an ancient dragon head, that's a drake.
Yes. So these giant drakes, they definitely are more... I don't know, that they're more relevant than just the lower class of ancient dragons. Do you know what I mean? Like at one point they were obviously a threat enough to the ancient dragons or someone that they thought it better to slay them and like get rid of them. And then they had they had a forefather or whatever you call it who rose up and was fighting against the oppressive ancient dragon hierarchy. So
the chicken or egg situation you have really is they call them lowborn, but it's like at what point were they the lowborn? Like did the chicken or egg is, did the ascension like come later, or were they ascended beings to begin with, and did they degrade over time?
Yeah.
But I think like a good indicator of that, and something I want to touch on eventually, is we do have another example of a very similar and like a strikingly... So the first thing I saw when I saw Bale, I was of Dragon God from Demon Souls, and I know you haven't played Demon Souls, but the lore behind Dragon God is nothing short of fascinating and very Bale coded. So definitely something that I'll be making a video on eventually. But the idea of Dragon God is very, very reminiscent of Bale.
So the one thing that I wanted to bring to the table, because I haven't heard anyone else talking about it, and we are friends with someone in the community who sees mimics everywhere they look. And I'm not saying something bad about this person, but it got my my mind, like, the gears in my mind just turning. And I thought to myself, okay, so something that's been hammered away to us is that the humanoids in the lands between right now are very prejudiced toward the albinorics because they are considered a lower life form because they are, man-made or handcrafted or whatever. They're not natural. The the ancient dragons see the drakes that way, but the interesting, dichotomy here is that the drakes do seem natural, whereas the ancient dragons do not. So what if the ancient dragons made of gold were constructs with hearts of gold, of stone or whatever? What if they are constructs? What if they are artificial? What if they are the mimic? And
there's two.
They overcame their forebears, which were the drakes, and then they were like, we're better than you. Just like humans these days, we look back at quote cavemen, Neanderthals, and Australopithecus, and all of those forebears of humanity, and we look at them and we call them cavemen. We just automatically think that we are higher beings than they are, but we're just now discovering that Neanderthal made musical instruments and may have been a singer. So they're working there because they're a singer.
I think it's an inversion, like we see anyway. Between horned things being worshipped by the horn scent, and then horned things being viewed as a curse by that which came afterwards. It's the same sort of inversion of something being something that's appreciated and then something that's reviled in another era. But one theory I sort of have about the dragons is what we know about the onyx and alabaston lords is that they came to life when a meteorite hit long ago. Came to life is very interesting. I don't know whether or not they came to life as a result of coming from the asteroid, or if perhaps the asteroid's impact had an effect on corpses in the area and sort of reconstituted them using, I'd imagine, the stardust that was on the asteroid, which is the essence of life. Which is interesting on 2 points. Because sorry, I just was quickly get this point off my head before I bloody well forget it. I'll disappear. The dragons, if they were sort of ascended in that means, or as you said, a construct, and they were sort of crafted from the dragons. If the dragons came before the ancient dragons, it sort of would make sense, because they would be ancient in that if they were dead before, they're older than the dragons that exist now, so they are literally ancient and they've come back to life.
Yes.
But the thing that really sort of got me, that made it click in my head, was a while back when we were looking at the if you go to Ray Lucaria and there's those unique pots that don't have the pattern up the top, and they've got the gold that's holding them together.
Yes.
I can see a huge relation there between it, exactly, which I think the dragons basically are. They're dragon corpses that have been put back together with the influence of the fingers, which is why they have those finger crowns.
I think that they are. That's very possible, and I'd be willing to bank on it, on what you just said. But I also,
I'm not going to put all my money on it, but
I get the feeling from looking at Fortisax, Fia and dragon form Fortisax. She's covered in black, but what's under that black is a dragon entirely gold.
Yeah.
So
I reckon they're fully gold. But
so
reconstituted.
And I think that the reason why she's black and gold and looks entirely gold, more beautiful than any of the other dragons, is because she wasn't touched by the eclipse. She didn't have the color drained from her. She didn't have her golden mineral flesh turned to stone. which is really fascinating to think about, because now all those other constructs, they might have also at one time been constructed of another material, but because they were touched by the eclipse, now they are made of stone. What if Marika and Radigan, who are made of stone, what if they were touched by the eclipse? So there's just so many different things of, if you guys haven't seen this video by Occam's Onion, I highly recommend it. Go have a look at it. It's incredible. It's the thing that I keep touching on when I talk about this stuff, and it very, very seamlessly ties in with everything that Scum has been talking about here.
God, I'm so tempted. I don't want to poison the world, but I'm so tempted.
You have to.
I know, because I'm
this.
convinced an eclipse. I too am convinced an eclipse has happened because Mikola has only attempted things that have worked for
have
other
happened
people.
Before. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
so I fully agree with you. Because he pioneers.
And the Black Moon is missing for a reason.
Yes, and that's why I'm thinking, as we're talking about this. By the way, the hole in the. Never mind. Well, do you see my cursor on the screen?
Yeah.
You do. Do you see the hole in the root system right here? That's also right here.
Wait, no, I can't see it.
You can't see my cursor?
Wait, do it again. Yeah. That hole in the middle. Yeah.
That hole and that hole.
Yeah.
So earlier you were at the grandmother tree in the hinterlands, and there's a hole that looks exactly like that, and it just like shook me. But anyway, back to what I was saying before. The reason why all of this is like shaking the foundations of my mind in regards to Elden Ring is because if that's the case, then this world really is like a post-apocalyptic world beyond what we understood it to be when we first came in, because obviously there was an age of abundance that came before this, and we're in a post-apocalypse, but like the technology was incredible and tremendous.
Look at the laser golems. Here's the thing. Look at those laser golems, right? You picture a battlefield full of those laser golems, it'd look like a fucking mech war. Yes. With them all out there, like shooting lasers and shit at each other. It'd look crazy.
And are you talking about the little purple balls with the eye?
No.
You're talking about the big laser.
You know,
golems.
the giant, the big one that
yeah.
does that circle and makes all those lasers come up. It look like a mech war.
Yeah, those and the balls that I was talking about. Like, this is technology that is really incredible, and the really cool thing is that it glows purple.
They're panic shelters.
Does it? It glows purple. The balls do. The little balls with the laser beam. They glow purple. Yeah. It looks very obviously to me like some kind of gravity magic. And the really cool thing about what you were saying before about the meteor, when the meteor struck Farum Azula, if there were dragons of gold in, like up against the wall trying to defend their lord, when the meteor struck, and blasted some of their flesh away, which is made of maybe silver and gold. Maybe that's why when these beings arose, struck through with veins of silver and gold, their life force was literally dragon life force that was artificial already, but was brought to life via the meteor. There's just so many different paths of thought that like erupt from my mind when I think of it. Yeah, it's incredible shit.
It is.
And so those glyphs on that weapon. Oh, but anyway, so anyway, I
digress.
Yeah, let's get back to your video because we've got 30 more minutes.
Power and vitality, as we see in Godfrey and his knights, and as I am arguing, as we see in the giants from engorging the fruit of the trees. This new distribution from the Erd tree, not taking shape like the fruit once found all through the lands between, via the Great Tree Network, but of sap collected and distributed by those in control, to empower and perhaps even control their favoured and most loyal warriors, taking the power from the Great Tree Network in order to bolster their own forces, literally hoarding power, a much more controlled system. In the age of the two trees before this system, people would live, die, their flesh burned away and their spirit guided back to the roots and be reborn once more. Or at least, their essence would once again become life, and the cycle would continue. And this design was the mistake of the greater will, as from life comes death, and from death comes power, and with this divine knowledge...
No! But these are so cute, actually.
fiery ambition. I would wager certain important clergymen, priests, and ascetics, which are solitary spiritual people, were gifted or partook of the fruit of knowledge, acting as the guardians of this divine truth. And perhaps when the ancient dragons were dealt their critical blow, their king mortally wounded by Baal, with Olympus in turmoil, as if the Titans had sent the gods into disarray, they put in motion a plot to usurp the greater will and use the one great and their divine knowledge of the mechanisms of life and death to ascend to godhood in place of the fled god of the dragons. If the sap of the Erd Tree grants the imbiber power and vitality, I imagine the effects of partaking of the fruit of the Tree of Life would have similar effects. If this is the case, and these priests ate as much fruit as they were able, like a tarnished popping stacks of runes and leveling up, I can imagine their strength, stature, vitality, and power would be unfathomable, godlike even. I think this is reinforced by the fact that man was once much larger, likely having partaken of this fabled fruit and being much larger in general, and became feeble after fighting one another, likely by design, over the age of the Crucible. The Age of the Crucible was done as a two-part plan, both to empower the Crucible for the Erd Tree and enfeeble mankind, as when they were killed and returned to the roots, as the two great trees which previously operated and comprised the one great had been destroyed by the Astel sent by the greater will, in my opinion, to stop the fell god. There was no more fruit for their descendants, who in comparison would be smaller, sapped of this once bountiful nutrient, which, after the Erd Tree's growth, was distributed only to the champions of the Erd Tree in the form of sap, to solidify their supremacy. And so, with the distribution of souls from the Great Tree network halted, and the Age of the Crucible culling those enriched with the bounty of the fruit, returning their power or souls to the roots, what was borrowed was returned. But that was just the beginning, perhaps, of the sin of the giants. Perhaps the imbibing of the fruit of the Tree of Life was part of the sin, but I think it's what they did with the knowledge that they gained from the fruit of the Tree of Knowledge that was the true transgression. The divine fruit of the original tree, which perhaps they partook of in order to become priests of death in the first place, or as blasphemy after the dragons retreated to Farum Azula. It wasn't just the taking and the eating of the fruit that was the real problem, but instead what they did with the knowledge they gained about the nature of souls, of life, death, and power. Also located between two trees is the Forge of the Giants, which may have existed during the Age of the Two Trees and Reign of the Dragons, as the heads on it are very reminiscent of dragons, though I'm not too sure if it's ancient or not, because if we have a look from behind, we notice these fins, which are very similar to the ones seen on drakes. They also have creepy people teeth, like the divine beasts. If it was used during the time of the ancient dragons, it was likely used to craft the protectors of the catacombs, using the knowledge of souls, of life and death. Whether or not it's ancient or non-ancient dragon, I'm not entirely sure, but perhaps the fork-tongued dragon weapon wielded by the imps is an indication, as a fork-tongued dragon to me sounds almost serpentine, like how the drakes seem more biological and reptilian than their ancient dragon counterparts. And these dragons look awfully serpent-like. Or perhaps again it is simply the ancient dragons as they were in the time of their reign, before their features were petrified, and their gold diminished. Whichever it is, it doesn't matter for the point I am making, which is that this giant melting pot of life was the ultimate representation of the giant sin, and was used by the giant priests after the fall of the dragons to craft the civilization of soul slavery, and bring about the Industrial Revolution equivalent in the lands between, and in the process depleting the One Great. On the base of the stone coffins we see a snake eating its own tail. However, if we look a little closer, we can see that this snake has two forms. One has a much different looking snout and brow ridge, more dragon-like than the other. And while one seems to have the creepy human teeth that we see on the divine beasts and on the snakes or dragons on the forge, the other has fangs. The Ouroboros is an ancient symbol that depicts a serpent or dragon eating its own tail. The earliest record of Ouroboros was found in the 1600 BC in ancient Egypt. The symbol was used to document the Egyptians' understanding of the sun and was said to represent the travels of the sun disk, as well as the cycle of life and rebirth. And in Faramazula, I believe this is shown in multiple images, especially the lamprey-like imagery, which I would argue shows the cycle of life coming from a tree and spreading that life, that it is all the same thing. And we see a copy of this iconography in Eni Ilim. This represents rejuvenation and new beginnings, like the tree growth cycle, the continuation of the cycle, and I believe it was the breaking of this cycle that is the essence of the original sin, similar to the linking of the fire or the other options in Dark Souls. It was the breaking of this cycle, the removal of souls from the Great Tree Network to fuel their own fiery ambition to become gods over life and death, that was their sin. Just like in the tale of Alexander the Great and the giant priests of the two trees, I wager that the priests who consume the fruit of the tree of life, becoming long-lived and grand, became the giants who began the divine art of smithing, with their divine knowledge from the tree of knowledge. It was this knowledge that led to the rise of spirit technology, the smith-script weapons that are imbued with spirits, allowing them to return to the owner when thrown or launched. Their eternal slave labor, the golems, who were powered by spirits, whose weapons don't hold similar to the Rao burrows. Spirit-catching instruments used to manipulate the power of spirits. Guardians of the burials powered by similar means, with weapons donning similar holes. And imps with representations of all parties involved. It was this knowledge that led to their grandeur, their power, and their fiery ambition. The erecting of grand forges to fuel this new empire, based on the foundation of soul manipulation. What I am saying would mean the magma has souls in it. And, well, yes, it does. I believe what is in the middle of the Giant's Forge is very likely corpse wax. I think this is heavily hinted at by the fact that the weapon of the Fire Prelate Chief, who beheaded himself in a sacrifice to show his faith, is called the Cranial Vessel, which is a candlestick with what appears to be a mound of corpse wax in the middle that explodes, igniting with fire, giving what I imagine is a clear demonstration of the whole process. We see the result of this in the forges throughout the Shadowlands, watched over by the spirit slave smithing golems, who were likely powered by this red glintstone.
Hey everyone, big heads up, Paleo Valley's running a sale on all their meat sticks right now. You can get 30 sticks for 36
sticks,
which is said to be made through the power of sacrifices, who keep as their pets living magma. Living magma that is very akin to the Silver Tears, artificial life forms whose core is essentially a blank slate soul. Either life forms were sacrificed to this forge to become one with the magma to be imbued with weaponry and technology, or perhaps they felled and used trees, which contain souls of the living. As hinted at by the root resin, that's more than likely corpse wax. I do wonder though if they did sacrifice people, if it was the shaman, given the manner of their execution is very reminiscent of the vindictive impaling crusade Marika ordered against the Hornsent, who used her people, the shaman, to try and attain godhood through melting pots of life. After all, we already have proof of concept of this, and the forges being used for burning people and souls, specifically the souls of maidens, like Melina, or Banal's maiden. And the fire giants themselves aren't too shy about sacrificing their own limbs for power. So who initiated all of this? Who has a vast arsenal of divine knowledge, and who is the best contender for being the long-lived, giant head priest of this order, who would become the fell god? There is only one contender, in my eyes. There is only one person that has more statues and depictions of himself throughout the lands between than Marika and Radagon combined, yet who is as nameless and as unmentioned as the fruits of the great tree. Like his name and accomplishments were wiped from history entirely, cleansed like a stain. There is only one man who is presented embedded in a tree like the gods Marika and Radagon, and who is at the center of all of these locations and civilizations. There is only one man shown on the campaign trail of the Old Order in Liurnia, on these peculiar structures. The 4 belfries link together 3 vital locations: the ancient dynastic ruins between the ancient dynastic ruins and Siofra's eternal city, the Chapel of Anticipation, and Farum Azula, one famously unfamous individual, so much so that the community, not the game, had to make a name for him. And I would recommend that name be changed to Felden John. And I believe the one-eye symbolism may very well have started with Felden John, given his statues look as though they are missing an eye. I feel like this is even hinted at even further in the reliefs in Mogwin, which have a red effect going over that very eye. Not only is this man almost entirely depicted as a giant, but he is the man carrying the tablets, the divine knowledge, the words of God, depicted as the known gods are in the sacred tree. These belfries are integral to understanding the links and the story as a whole. They tie together extremely important locations and tell the story of the man depicted on them. Not only do they link together the ancient ruins, Chapel of Anticipation, Farum Azula, and the Eternal Cities, but just as the catacombs and heroes' graves which are adorned in Elphael's symbology share the same jars with the ancient ruins, the belfries which link all of these locations using Eternal City technology also display the skull iconography from Elphael. And on the theme of divinity, the Divine Tower at their center doors, we see the same bodies floating towards the center as we do in the catacombs and heroes' graves. There is also a host of other symbolism linking these locations, but I'm going to spare you for now, as that can and will be explored in the next video. This would mean, in some manner, the death rites of old should have something to do at least with giants, and in addition to the giant coffins we do indeed see the Tibia Mariner summon giants, donning a ring on their wedding finger. I truly do believe the North region, sacred and forbidden, home to an ancient and sacred tree, a powerful people who once ruled the lands, was tremendously important. There are many mythologies which draw striking parallels between the northern sacred snowlands protected by storms and the treasures and knowledge they hold, and the people who reside there. For instance, Hyperborea was a realm of eternal spring, located in the far north, beyond the home of the North Wind. Its people were a blessed, long-lived race, untouched by war, hard toil, and the ravages of old age and disease. Hyperborea was usually described as a continent-bound land bordering the north by the great, earth-encircling river of Oceanus, and on the south peaks of the legendary Rhipaean Mountains. Its main river was the Eridanos, whose banks were lined with amber-weeping poplar trees, and its water home to flocks of white swans. Blessed with eternal spring, the land produced 2 crops of grain per year, but most of the countryside was wild, and covered with beautiful forests, the so-called Garden of Apollon. The southern border of Hyperborea was guarded by the bitterly cold peaks of the impassable Rhipaean Mountains, home of the Borei, whose chill breath
Giving that
brought winter to the lands of the south. Its peaks were inhabited by gold-guarding griffins, and its valley by the fierce, one-eyed Aramaspoi tribe. Beneath the southern slopes lay Terophorus, a desolate, snow-covered land cursed with eternal winter. Hyperborea was a theocracy ruled by 3 priests of the god Apollon. These giant kings, known as the Boredae, were sons of Bore, the north wind. Their capital contained a circular temple dedicated to the god where hecatombs, 100 head of asses, were sacrificed in his honor. The people also celebrated their god in an eternal festival of music, song, and dancing. The realm plays a role in several myths. Pantheon tried to drive the chariot of the sun, but lost control and was struck down by Zeus, sending his flaming body plummeting into the Hyperborean river Eridanos. His mourning sisters were afterward transformed into amber-shedding poplar trees on its banks. There are stories that describe Hyperboreans as pilgrim founders of several important Greek shrines. The Delians told a tale of how the pregnant goddess Leto came to the island from Hyperborea, accompanied by a pack of wolves, where she gave birth. On our way to the sacred mausoleums, there is a secret passage linking the forbidden snow wastelands to the sacred fields, which holds the iconography of both of these locations, a secret burial ground leading to the land of the dead, the sacred fields. And these staff-wielding kings, like those in Farum Azula, like those knights and figures in Elphael, guard the way to the sacred fields, where the ancient and tallest boughs rest, devastated. Nothing but their carcass remaining, just like the once immense tree at its peaks, of which naught but a stump remains. The system that took over after the fall of these 2 trees was a closed and controlled system, ushering the souls and power back to the roots in the age of the Crucible and re-establishing the supremacy of the Greater Will over the One Great. Unlike the previous age, where souls were sanctioned to be used to make their priests long-lived, create guardians for the catacombs and spirit summoning as seen in the commanders of the knights of their forces, and the presence of banished knights in their spectral form, the only soul juice leaving this new tree that bore no fruit was the sap. The use of souls and the power for the protection and perpetuation of the system is sanctioned, hallowed, and a duty. However, the use of that knowledge, of souls and power, for one's own fiery ambition, that is the very sin that would corrode the foundations of the One Great. This is why the fire giants are impaled like the Hornsend, who use divine knowledge to commit atrocities, and do nothing but take from the One Great. Perhaps another hint are the burned 2 fingers on the left hand of the fire giant. As I have mentioned in previous videos regarding meta, and as a subscriber Moss Owns You YouTube reminded me in my post about the fingers, Syncadia was used to grant intelligence to the beasts by the god of the dragons. And so, if granting fingers grants intelligence or knowledge, and the fire giants are the remnants of these priests whose sin was their use of divine knowledge, then perhaps the removal of fingers symbolizes or results in the removal of intelligence, like some form of lobotomy. Perhaps this is why the fire giant, who was once at the peak of society, has a vocabulary consisting of... But what on earth could burn a fire giant? Is it frostbite from the environment, or ancient Zermor warriors? Was it Mesmer's flame, which can burn even spirits, as shown by the Shadowland denizens? Or perhaps another flame we are all familiar with, one which the monks of the Flame of Ruin fled to, out of fear. Regardless, the presence of a red, glowing, almost runesque or stitching in the wound suggests to me it was specific and intentional, and very similar to the 3 fingers. If we put them side by side, and a shout out to Zuli the Witch for this amazing image of the whole hand, we begin to see that perhaps there was in fact some form of whole hand, or One Great, that was fractured. And what better way to display the fractures of the One Great, a whole hand broken by this betrayal, than this imagery? Given Meta and the 2 fingers she births are broken, it really does make one wonder about the relationship and what the not broken children of Meta would have looked like. And so, with the age of the Crucible and establishment of the Erd Tree, the return of the souls via wars and battles and the prevention of that power being distributed by the fruits of life, and only by sap to chosen champions, what was borrowed was returned. You may have noticed there is quite a lot missing, as I have tried very hard.
Quickly say, just in relation to that 5-finger thing, someone from Jack's Discord posted something very, very eye-catching to me. Look at this. I thought that was just brilliant. I think it's Radagon. Is it Radagon's attack?
Yeah, that's Radagon with the hammer.
That is 5 fingers goal. That is a hand.
Wow.
So I was just like, yeah, that everyone's like, it's been disproven. 5 fingers has nothing to do with it. Zuli showed that 2 fingers don't match up with a 3 finger. Blah, blah, blah. Shh. No. It is not disproven at all.
No.
At all. It's just a very interesting observation that she made, but it doesn't mean that it's disproven.
Agreed.
Not at all.
Agreed. I mean, you know, different models, different regions, different purposes. And anyway, because this 2 fingers doesn't fit that 3 fingers, etc.
Exactly.
But yeah, that is fascinating. and I thought about the patterns that get hammered in the ground when you use any of the weapons associated with Radagon and America, but I never put that together. It's fascinating.
Only to tell half of the story, which I will be exploring in the next major video. After all, there is another tree, and there are other ancient lords with skin of stone who came to life when a meteorite hit long ago, who don patterns hinting at an ancient lineage. And there are other secret lineages, such as the mysterious Knights of Eocade. Other secret lineages, such as the at an ancient lineage. And there are other secret lineages, hinting at an ancient lineage.
This belt, these square links of metal, this is something we see all the time with like the shaman. We see
the shaman have them on their legs.
What's her face has it on her dress. Melania.
On the throne as well.
It's on the throne. It's on Godric's fucking circlet is made out of it. Like it's all over the place, and it seems to be associated with like the shaman. But anyway.
It is a very foundational design, and also the patterns on their bodies, the like gold scarring on their bodies reminds me a lot of the scarring on Marika / Radagon's body. Like a lot.
That's fascinating.
And there are other secret lineages, such as the mysterious Knights of Eocade, comprised of warriors and ascetics, whose flying weapons, noting not to mistake their colour for rust, are inscribed with runes. There are other ancient cities, an ancient civilization who most certainly has a thing or two to do with trees, water, spirits, and the power of life and death, who have the twin bird written all over them, and whose sacred black moon was destroyed in mysterious circumstances, and whose sky was taken away after inspiring the ire of the greater will, whose technology links places of untold importance at the belfries and beyond, nestled each time by an ancient ruin, whose influence infects nearly every corner of the lands between, whose lineage is sprinkled throughout the lands between with traces leading back to Elphael, a society of sorcerer priests and royalty. Just like the Sword of Night and Flame, there is a second side to this, and just like the fall of the Fell God, Kingdom of the Sun, and Reign of the Dragons, the fall of these ancient cities is inextricably connected, as causality would have it, as regression demands. And what about the other grand figures who appear in both ancient depictions, ruins, and throughout the lands between? Their untold stories become unraveled by following the clues, the links of lineage hidden in plain sight. And one very important figure. Join me in my next long-form video, where I will explore the other half, and therefore the whole of it. The timeline of the grandmother, lineage of the three sisters.
Scum, scum, scum. You've outdone yourself, darling.
Thank you, darling.
Incredible, incredible video. Remarkable, really.
So glad it's done and I never have to do it again.
Dark Souls is one of the best series of all
What is
time.
this? What,
It has
end
one of the
on
most
an ad.
complex yet remarkable.
How dare? Who's Gingy? How dare?
Who is Gingy? How dare you?
How dare you co-opt my stream? But yes, remarkable video, incredible finds. You consistently blow my mind every time I watch your videos. It's very it's giving
Thank you.
Occam's Onion, it's giving Tarnished Archaeologist, it's giving She Who Shall Not Be Named.
Who cannot be named. Simply cannot be named.
Because she is nameless. And
She is
she's
indeed.
working late. Because she's a singer. But anyway.
It's a prophecy.
It is a prophecy.
I can't wait to see what she comes out with.
We need to reach out to her because you two need to do a bit of chitter chatter back and forth. So I think I'm gonna do that. I think I'm gonna arrange that. I think I'm gonna talk to her. But don't be intimidated.
Wait till after the granny video. I'm
Okay.
going into isolation.
I will do you that favour. I will wait till after the granny.
Jack's enough for now.
But she's about to have
So-
another video come out.
I know.
And when it does, it's going to be popping all over. Yes.
All of them, yeah.
Everybody will be
Yeah,
popping
it's going to be really good.
But
she has not gone silent for this long to not have any. And I feel kind of bad, actually. I was like, fuck, I hope it hasn't put like any pressure on her or anything. Like, doing that. Be like, she's going to start posting vids soon and stuff, because I would hate that. But I only say it because I have nothing but respect for her method and for the end result. Like, both of her videos were just S tier.
They really were. And she broke ground with them, talked about things nobody else has, and just unveiled. She was like, listen, bitches, and pulled the veil back.
I'm
and
bored.
stuff.
Look at this. Yeah,
Yes,
literally just
she
blew
was
it all
like,
out of the water.
You don't even know what
Boring.
you're talking about.
Yeah.
What game were you playing? Because, but
Yep.
yeah, incredible stuff. We should definitely, we'll definitely reach out to her at some point. But you can't be scared. After your grandmother video, you can't. That's it. You promised.
Fine, I'll
I'm
talk to
holding you your
people, I
word.
swear.
Yes,
Fine.
and you're also gonna watch the Onion video. But
Yeah, fucking Onion video.
we're talking about nameless singer Spotify. If you have not watched her videos and you haven't
You
watched
must.
Arkham Onion's videos, I highly recommend that you find them on YouTube, watch both of their videos, because both of them have not made very many videos at all. And it took both of them a really long time to make the videos that they did make.
You can
but they
see
are
why.
incredible.
Yeah.
You can definitely see why, because not only are they incredible and groundbreaking in the lore community, but they are also incredibly well crafted.
Yes.
But yeah, so anyway, does anyone have any questions or anything that you saw in the video that you would like to speak with Scum about? Because now is
If you
your
can't think of
chance.
any, if you can't think of any now, that's fine. Just pop into the Discord and start a big lore storm chat later. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to attempt to answer them, and not like some like asshole government member that's I can neither confirm nor deny it, though I can't promise.
There are things you can neither confirm or deny, though, if they're going to be this next video.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell you what, lining up those shots of Rani and the grandmother, which I was stressing so much about that. I really wanted to put that out in the ether because I hadn't seen anyone mention how the grandmother and Rani are sitting in the exact same position. But
are they?
Getting them to line up, yeah.
I mean, I know
to
both
make
of
it...
their hands are like off to the side.
Well, their hands are in the... It's Rani's back set of hands, which is the part that made it really annoying to get a good comparison of.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's her back set of hands, it doesn't line up properly if they are at the same level as one another, and it makes it more difficult to see. So
yeah,
but I ended up lining it up so it had bugger. See, I was gonna put like boxes around the hands, but I was like, that kind of breaks the sort of like serenity of it. But yeah, look, it's gonna be the thumbnail for the grandmother video for sure, because it is such a quintessential, like it's the summary.
Wow.
So, spoiler alert, go look at that and that's it.
Ronnie is literally old Nan.
Probably next month. Fuck off a pal, though. Look, first comes the grandmother, and then eventually I'll start thinking about the whole scope of it. But the grandmother, to be frank with you, the history is extensive and does essentially go back to the beginning of everything.
To the realm.
The grandmother in the lineage of the three sisters, most definitely. Which is one of the main reasons I think that there are those three, the three great trees by the three eternal cities, the three sisters, the three sister trees of like life.
That makes
and then the one big old tree of death at the top. But
so the tree of knowledge, the tree of life, and the tree of death.
So it's the tree of knowledge is the tree of death, and that's the one at the north. And the reason it's the tree of knowledge and the tree of death is because the knowledge aspect of in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, you have the tree of life, which you're allowed to eat from, grants you eternal life, keeps you nice and healthy. I imagine immortality. I'd imagine coincides with good health, I'd hope. And then you've got the tree of knowledge, which God forbade Adam and Eve from eating from. Everyone knows that story. She ate the damn apple, they both ate the damn apple, and now they go die, basically. So it does grant you knowledge of good and evil, which is the knowledge that God has, which is divine knowledge. And as a result of that, they were then basically cursed to die. So as a consequence of gaining that knowledge, they also they would also die. They lost the perks of the Tree of Life, essentially, and the perks of the Garden of Eden. I think in the case of Elden Ring, you have the Tree of Knowledge / Death at the top in the sacred consecrated snowlands where both of these big mausoleums were. You have the mausoleum inside of El Fael that's in the stump near where Mikkel is in the drainage canals, I think it is. And then you have Farum Azula, which is a giant grave. Death is where power from life comes from. So the death of life is where you get power. Which is, I imagine the idea is life is souls in a form that you can't really use. So when that life dies and becomes souls, you can then use souls as a source of power, if that makes sense. So then all of the corpses being in the north, where this Tree of Knowledge / Death is, means all of the bounty would pool up there. That's where everything would return from through the roots and then be distributed through the lands between, which is why the rune of Farum Azula looks the way it is. Then the Tree of Life, which is the one throughout the Garden of Eden. I don't think there was one, to be honest. I think there was one, like the main one, which was the one by the Nameless Eternal City, but then I think there may have been, again, 3, which is the 3 Eternal Cities, the 3 Sisters, 3 giant trees of life bearing fruit, all the same, but then they have all of those smaller tree networks throughout the lands between that may have also, like you've got the minor Erd trees where they've got chalices there waiting to collect the sap from. You could have had a situation where there were minor great trees of these 3 great trees throughout the lands between that were also bearing fruit. I don't really know. It's like pure speculation past that point, but regardless, I think that it was the tree of death and knowledge at the top, and then throughout the lands between, you had the trees that were bearing the fruit of life. And it was what the priests and the clergymen, or those who would essentially run death throughout the lands between, did with the knowledge that they gained from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, that kind of led to the destruction of the One Great, and the draining of the One Great of its power. All of the souls that were in the roots feeding the tree instead went to building these golems that would protect catacombs, building these golems that would, basically be their slave labor, their defenses, then like moving everything around, all of this weaponry that had to do with souls, like Smith script weaponry, etc., 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 etc. And then, like, they're huge. So if this is the concept, and that eating the fruit of life, for example, does grant you this sort of situation, then they would have had to have eaten a lot of that goddamn fruit. So I imagine probably when Placidusax got BTFO'd by Baal, it was at that point they started these sort of machinations, if they are within that same timeline as each other. That would be my best sort of guess at it, but I mean,
so,
there are potential inconsistencies regardless of that.
So help me understand the significance of 3 if 2 are the same and 1 is different. Like if there are 2 trees of life and 1 tree of both death and knowledge.
3 trees, because you've got Noxtella, Nokron, and the Nameless Eternal City. So there will be a tree of life of each of those, and there is 1 tree of death, which is also the tree of knowledge. In the Bible, the tree of knowledge is the tree of death, because as a result of eating of the tree of knowledge, you will die.
Okay. So, and that's what you were talking about when you were talking about Hyperborea. Like, they didn't used to die, they didn't used to have disease, they didn't used to have all that, but then someone ate from the tree of knowledge/death.
Again, it's not an exact rip from the Bible. I'm not saying it's the exact same thing. I'm just using it as a concept to base the idea of 2 trees off and what they sort of would have. I'm not saying that they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge and then died afterwards and then knew death afterwards. My idea with what happened with it, my idea is that they would have had to eat that fruit anyway to be able to usher death. Like the Tibia Mariners probably ate the fruit, so they knew how to guide death to the roots through the water. And like they need that knowledge of the divine, the knowledge of how souls work, in order to operate the mechanisms of that. So it may well have been a sanctioned thing that they ate this fruit so that they understood how souls worked, so that they could help manage souls on behalf of the kingdom of the sun as the agents of the moon. But then when the opportunity arose, their fiery ambition led them to destroy the Great Tree Network in an attempt to ascend to godhood themselves, in the absence, I imagine, of the fled god. Because I don't think they would have been able to pull that shit off with the god not fled.
Fascinating.
Truly. Which, again, makes me think about Baal, and what Jack said about Baal being a mimic, potentially being the instigation of the downfall of this kingdom, makes it make much more sense to me anyway. Not that I fully accept it yet, obviously, but it does make it more relevant. I can fuck with that.
Yeah.
Well, I can, because like the Eternal Cities are found underground. They're obviously one of the oldest civilizations ever. And
they were trying to
this
make
all
dragons.
Exactly, and it all started with Baal. All of the problem with the dragons started with their downfall started with Baal. And then I feel like, again, like perhaps the eclipse coincided with this is another potential part of it, because I feel like being able to identify what actually the eclipse does, like why does Mikola want an eclipse to happen? How does that mean Godwin's soul's going to come back? You know what I mean? So it's like when you've figured out sort of exactly what the mechanism behind the eclipse is and why he wanted that to happen, and how that was going to result in Godwin coming back to life, then it kind of puts into perspective what the potential motives of the Eternal Cities were and just how deep that sort of goes as well. But I know I'm being pretty vague with it, but they're just huge concepts from the next video, so I can't
Yeah.
blurt as much as I'd like to about it, unfortunately.
I understand. Well, that's great because it gives us more to talk about after you release your video.
Tell me about it. God, that'll be a conversation and a half.
It really will. And there are tons more things I actually want to talk to you about on a stream. But I feel like definitely we should organize it, and definitely we should do it when we haven't been on stream for like 5 hours.
Yeah, it's 4 a.m. here, so I'm pretty tired.
Yeah.
I'd just say, sorry, I'd missed his comment about the Weeping Peninsula looking like a fetus. Yeah, I have seen... I don't usually watch other LoreTube videos and stuff, but I did see Scented Tarnished's
Yeah,
video
it was him.
about yeah, and it was a brilliant video about the lands between being a fetus and about the cranium imagery with Landell, which I believe also is relatable to. I don't know if he included Farum Azula or Elphael. He didn't. Elphael. He didn't include one of them, but I think it is. I think it definitely relates to both of them. And then also they tie together very well with. I don't know if you've seen the pattern beneath Marika's feet on the stakes of Marika, but it's very reminiscent of Elphael and of the end of Landell. Hold on, I'll send you a picture.
Oh yeah, no, I have seen it. It's like a circle with lines coming away from it.
Yeah,
like
yeah, exactly.
The support
it's very similar. It is very similar. You should go have a look at when next time you're in the game. It's very interesting.
It is interesting.
And there's also ruins on her stake. But
ruins on her stake.
Yeah. Yep.
I'll have to have a look at that.
It is very interesting. Yay for time zones. Solar Bread, don't even get me started. Every time I get on Discord, I just start ranting at people because I have like 20 messages to respond to, and I'll just start replying to them all, and it just looks like me going insane just talking to myself. To wait another like 12 hours for replies.
I'm kind of the same because I work nights, and so I mostly am awake at night and sleep in the day, so at least, night and day here in the US, so same sort of thing happening with me. But it is well past both of our bedtimes, and I think we've had a wonderful stream. Thank you so much, Scum, for guiding us through all of this and helping us.
Thank you for watching it with me, guys. I appreciate it.
Pick your brain a bit. Yeah, it was glorious. Thank you guys all for watching, and I guess we'll do this again in a month. But in the meantime. We'll be delaying his video by doing co-op stuff and PvP stuff and special events.
And reporting on Meta's filthy secrets.
And we'll even be doing Beyond. By the way, it's hard for me to talk now that you've said Meta's filthy secret, and we'll even be doing debates, you guys. Tune in if you want to hear content creators in our little circle debating each other over particular lore points that they don't agree with, which are few and far between for the most part, but and most of them aren't really, what are you going to do? Say, well, I disagree, but we're going to try to have some fun with it and be, kind. And
it's going to be the shattering all over again.
Yeah. It's going to be exciting. So if you guys are into that, if you like to talk lore, if you like to hear other people's perspectives, keep on tuning in, and we will be doing all that kind of stuff here on my channel. Yeah, thank you guys.
Can't wait. Yeah. See you around.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night, day, morning, wherever you